The scorching heat of the African savanna poured down on the red, dusty trail, creating undulating heat waves on the horizon. Elias squinted through his lens, adjusting the focal length to capture the raw beauty of a reserve at high noon. As a veteran wildlife photographer, he was well acquainted with the threatening silence of this land. His golden rule was always, observe only, do not intervene. But today, nature seemed to have a different plan for him. Unusual rustling from the grass thickets, taller than a man, made Elias stop. He held his breath, hand ready on the camera body, waiting for a hunt or the powerful stride of a lord. But instead of a majestic silhouette, a small, golden form appeared. It was Coda, a lion cub about 4 months old, staggering out of the brush. Contrary to the instinct to fear humans, Coda did not run away. His eyes were not fierce, but were filled with a heartbreaking despair. Coda walked straight toward Elias, emitting weak little cries that sounded like the weeping of a lost child. Before Elias could regain his composure, he felt a light tug at his feet. Coda had grabbed the hem of his khaki trousers, not to attack, but to pull him away. The sharp baby teeth held on cautiously, the large round eyes of the little lion looking directly at Elias like a silent plea. In that moment, Elias understood he was no longer an invisible observer. He had been chosen. Coda looked toward the dense acacia forest ahead, then back at him, beginning a journey that Elias knew he could not refuse. Elias walked in a state suspended between disbelief and compassion. According to the instinct of a longtime woodsman, following a predator deep into the brush was a suicidal act. However, the determined tugging of Coda and the small lion's frequent pauses to look back urged him to keep going. Whenever Elias showed signs of hesitation, Coda would emit urgent whimpers, his tail lashing the air continuously, a sign of extreme anxiety. The deeper they went into the tall grass, the more the atmosphere changed visibly. The fragrant scent of dry grass was gradually overwhelmed by a heavy, pungent smell of fresh blood and the characteristic stench of scavengers. Elias shuddered. He lowered his center of gravity, slipping through the thorny acacia trees. When the final bushes were pushed aside, a painful sight appeared before his eyes that made his heart tighten. Under the base of a dry wooden tree, Mara, Coda mother, lay there in utter exhaustion. Her front leg was clamped tightly by a rusted steel trap, that silent killer that poachers often leave behind. The surrounding ground was torn up, stained red by blood and dust, showing how violently Mara had struggled to escape. The gaze that was once the majesty of a lord was now clouded with pain and blood loss. She gasped, each heavy and difficult breath accompanied by the vibration of her thin ribcage. But the tragedy did not stop there. In the shade of the nearby bushes, 3 dark shadows were lurking. It was Scar, the alpha hyena with a long scar on his ear, along with his pack. They did not attack immediately. With a cunning nature, Scar was playing a game of patience. The spine-chilling laughter, the characteristic hee-hee sound of hyenas, rang out, cutting through the silence of the afternoon. They knew Mara was exhausted. They were waiting for the moment the opponent heartbeat slowed down to rush in and tear her apart while she was still gasping for air. Coda ran straight to his mother, using his tiny head to nuzzle Mara's neck as if wanting to wake the strength within her. Then he turned his head, baring baby teeth that were not yet fully formed, growling weakly but bravely toward Scar. Coda's eyes looked at Elias, then back at the hyena pack that was gradually closing the circle. Elias realized he was facing a dire situation. If he did not act immediately, the most painful death in nature would take place before his eyes. But to save Mara, he not only had to face the ruthless hyenas, but also the fear of a wounded lion, something that could cause her to attack anyone who touched her. Time was running out. The sun was still burning high above, but the shadow of death had begun to envelop Mara under the cold supervision of Scar. In the suffocating space of the savanna, Elias felt sweat trickling down his spine, not just from the heat, but from the extreme tension. He was facing a life and death puzzle. If he stepped closer to remove the trap, Mara's final defensive instinct could cause her to swing her claws and tear him apart. But if he hesitated, Scar and the hyena pack would wait no longer. Elias slowly placed his backpack on the ground, trying not to make any sudden sounds. He took out a pair of heavy bolt cutters and a few rescue flares. First, he needed to deal with the uninvited guests. Scar, the lead hyena, seemed to recognize the human intervention. He bared his jagged teeth, taking a step forward, emitting a hoarse laugh of defiance. Elias took a deep breath. He stood tall to look larger and shouted a very loud cry, simultaneously activating the flare. The bright red light and acrid smoke flared up, making the hyenas startle and retreat. They growled but did not leave, only standing at a distance, observing with cunning eyes, waiting for Elias to make a mistake. Now came the hardest part. Facing Mara, Elias knelt, lowering himself to appear non-threatening. He began to talk in a low, steady voice, a technique he learned from longtime rangers to reassure injured animals. "Be calm, girl. I'm here to help.
Here.
Just a little longer,"
We'll have you free in just a
he
moment.
whispered, even though he knew she did
all right.
not understand human language. But he hoped the vibration in his voice could soothe the pain. Coda at this time played an important role that Elias never expected. The lion cub stood right between Elias and his mother. Instead of being afraid, Coda constantly looked at his mother and then at Elias, like an invisible connecting thread. As Elias moved closer, less than a meter away from Mara, the lioness bared her teeth, a growl shaking from deep within her chest. It was a deadly warning, but at that moment, Coda lightly touched his nose to his mother cheek, emitting small, gentle chuff sounds. As if understanding the sun promise, Mara gradually lowered her head, her tired eyes half closed, accepting the stranger touch on her wound. Elias used his trembling hands to place the cutters on the steel jaw of the trap. The sound of metal hitting metal was dry. He used all his strength to squeeze the handles. Crack! The first steel bar broke cleanly. Mara flinched in pain, her claws raking the ground, creating deep grooves, but she did not attack him. Elias felt her hot breath fanning his hand. He continued to cut the second steel bar. Blood from the wound flowed out again, but the metal jaws of death finally fell away from Mara's leg. Elias quickly backed away, his heart pounding as if it wanted to jump out of his chest. He had done it. He had freed the Lord from the shackles of cruelty. In the quiet space of the savannah, after the explosion of the flare and the dry sound of cutting metal, a silence covered everything. Elias stood there, his breath ragged, his hands still trembling from the terrible pressure he had just experienced. He backed away a few steps, keeping a safe distance, but his eyes did not leave Mara. The steel trap was now just a useless lump of metal lying on the red earth. Mara did not stand up immediately. Her body had been tormented for too long by pain and blood loss. She lay still, slowly pulling her leg back, then began to use her rough tongue to lick the wound. That action was both an instinct for self-healing and a way for her to feel the returned freedom. Coda, the brave lion cub, rushed to his mother's side. He nuzzled Mara's neck, emitting small, happy cries. That sight was so sacred that Elias forgot the presence of the hyenas lurking out there. As for Scar, the lead hyena and his pack finally understood that the feast they were waiting for had vanished into thin air. Elias' determined presence along with Mara being free meant they no longer had the advantage. After a few final resentful growls, Scar turned his back, leading his pack deep into the distant bushes. The threat from the scavengers had ended. It was at this moment that a second that Elias would carry for the rest of his life happened. Mara slowly raised her head. She no longer looked at Elias with eyes clouded by pain or the ferocity of a beast driven into a corner. Instead, she looked directly into his eyes, a long, deep look full of understanding. In the wild world, facing someone directly with the eyes is usually a challenge, but here, Elias felt a completely different flow of energy. It was recognition. Mara realized that this man, representing the species that created the trap, was also the person who risked his life to rescue her. Between a photographer and a lord, The boundary between human and wild beast seemed to be blurred by an invisible thread called empathy. Coda also stopped. He stood beside his mother, looking at Elias with the pure gratitude of a child. Mara gave a slight snort, a deep sound like a goodbye. Then she used her last bit of strength to stand up on 3 legs, walking with a limp but still maintaining her inherent majesty. Coda followed closely at his mother's heels, occasionally turning his head to look at Elias one last time before the silhouettes of the mother and son gradually vanished into the heat haze and the tall grass of the African wilderness. Elias stood still holding the bolt cutters, feeling the miraculous intersection between 2 souls that had just touched each other at the boundary of life and death. Under the fading light of the sunset, Elias stood quietly in the middle of the savannah, where just minutes ago was a battlefield of life and death. He leaned down, picking up the rusted steel trap. This metal object was heavier than he imagined, not just because of its weight, but because of the weight of the cruelty that humans can inflict on nature. He looked in the direction Mara and Coda had just disappeared, his heart filled with a feeling of emptiness but strange serenity. Elias slowly walked back toward the jeep parked in the distance. Each footstep on the red, dusty ground now carried a completely different meaning. He thought about Coda, a tiny living being but carrying the heart of a king. It was the courage and innocent faith of the lion cub that broke all barriers between the 2 species. If Coda had not been bold enough to find him, if the cub had not used love to reassure the suffering mother, then perhaps by now the wilderness would have lost a queen, and the savannah would have gained another grieving soul. Sitting in the car, Elias looked into the rearview mirror, seeing his silhouette stained with dust and dry blood, but his eyes shone with a new faith. This encounter was not just a simple rescue. It was a mirror reflecting the nature of humanity. We could be the ones who create cruel iron traps, but we also have the power to become healers. Empathy is not the exclusive privilege of humans. It exists in every breath of all species, just waiting for a sincere moment to explode. Elias opened his notebook, writing down lines of text with all his heart. Nature does not need us to dominate. Nature needs us to understand. The story of Mara and Coda will not end here. He knew he had to share these films and experiences with the world, not to polish his name, but to remind everyone that every trap removed, every force protected, is a time we redeem our own souls. The silent killers are still scattered out there, and Scar, along with other opportunistic hyena packs, will always be waiting in the dark corners. But as long as there are people who dare to step out of their comfort zone like Elias, and brave hearts like Coda, then hope will still be green like the grass fields after the rain. Before starting the engine to leave, Elias looked up at the sky, turning a deep purple of the night. He smiled slightly, sending a wish of peace into the wind for the 2 lions.
It's good to be back.
He understood that rescuing a life is not just pulling them out of death, but giving oneself a reason to live better. This story is an invitation to each of us. Listen to the call from nature. Act before the terrifying silence covers the forests, and believe that kindness is the only common language of this earth. The Serengeti steppe at noon was not for the faint of heart. The sun was like a giant ball of fire hanging directly overhead, pouring down onto the Kenyan plains a white and parched light. The sky was immensely high, without a single cloud, blue to the point of aching, but carrying a sweltering heat that seemed to burn away all life. The air at this time was no longer a normal gas. It became thick, shimmering, and dancing on the ground, creating heat mirages that made the horizon look blurred. Amidst that harshness, John lay motionless. He pressed himself against the hot, dusty ground, hiding under the thin, dry shade of a wild thorn bush. His grass-colored shirt was soaked with sweat, sticking to his back, while his eyes narrowed because the sun reflection was too strong. John did not move, even when a few insects crawled over his upper arm. In the world of wildlife photography, patience was not just a skill, it was a form of survival meditation. All his senses were directed toward the receding water hole in the distance. There, a herd of zebras was cautiously approaching. The contrast between their sharp black and white stripes and the withered yellow of the grassland created a beautiful scene. The sound of cicadas echoed steadily, like an hourglass, counting down the time. The space was so quiet that John could hear the wind whistling through the dry, brittle grass and the sound of his own heart beating, thumping in his chest. He held his breath, his index finger resting lightly on the shutter button, waiting for the perfect moment under this brilliant sun. The peace on the steppe was inherently just a thin veil, and in this land, it could be torn apart at any moment. While John was adjusting the focus to capture the alert gaze of the lead zebra, a sudden change occurred. The zebras, which were approaching the water hole slowly, suddenly stopped all at once. Their ears stood upright, turning toward the bushes that were taller than a person. In the blink of an eye, the leader let out a heartbreaking alarm cry, and the entire herd of dozens of horses immediately turned around, galloping in the opposite direction. The sound of hooves pounding on the parched earth created a sound like thunder rumbling in broad daylight. A cloud of white dust rose up, obscuring even the sunlight, turning the previously brilliant scene into a mess of dirt and echoes. John narrowed his eyes, trying to keep the camera lens from getting dusty, but a chilling sense of insecurity rose in his heart. The zebras were not running because they were afraid of him. They were fleeing from something much more devastating. Suddenly, the cicadas went silent. The whole steppe fell into a deadly silence. John felt the air pressure right behind his back change suddenly. A blast of hot air, carrying the characteristic pungent smell of wild beasts and the smell of old blood, blew on the back of his neck. Space seemed to condense. Under the harsh noon sun, a huge black shadow began to crawl over John's shoulder, completely covering his body in darkness. It was not the shadow of a cloud, but the shadow of a living entity. John slowly turned his head, his movement so slow it was almost invisible. His heart at this moment felt like it wanted to burst out of his chest. Right behind the wild bush where he was hiding, less than 3 meters away, was a mature male lion. In the clear detail of the daylight, the beast appeared more majestic and terrifying than any photo he had ever taken. Its mane was thick, dark brown mixed with black, fluttering slightly in the noon breeze. The eyes of the lion were not brown, but a brilliant amber yellow, cold and containing the ruthlessness of survival instinct. It looked straight into John's eyes, a look without hesitation. Under the naked light of the midday sun, John clearly saw each crisscrossing scar on its majestic face, trophies from bloody battles for territory. The long whiskers vibrated, and the white teeth behind the slightly drooping lips appeared threatening. The lion did not roar. It only slightly lowered its center of gravity, the muscular shoulders rolling beneath the sun-scorched yellow fur starting to contract like a steel spring waiting to be released. Every detail of the sharp claws hidden inside those muscles was vivid in John's mind. There was no darkness to hide, no place to run. John realized he had made the biggest mistake of a photographer. He had become the main target in the lens of death. The sunlight at this time was no longer warm. It shone on the fragility of a human being facing the lord of the savannah. In the wild world, a distance of 3 meters between a lion and prey was not called a distance. It was a death sentence. The beast did not give John another second to think. It let out a shocking roar, a sound that not only traveled through the air, but also penetrated through John's chest, shaking his ribs. Immediately, that huge mass of muscle lunged forward. Its footsteps were so strong that they sent dust from under the dry grass flying, creating a blur under the harsh sun. John was not a warrior. He was just a photographer with the only weapon being the camera in his hand. In the moment when life and death were only a breath apart, the survival instinct rose fiercely. He did not have time to stand up to run, because he knew he could never be faster than a speed predator. In an unconditional reflex, John ripped off the heavy tactical backpack he was wearing on his shoulder, the only obstacle between him and the lunging claws. With all his might, he threw the backpack forward, hoping it could deflect the fatal pounce. The lion, provoked by the flying strange object, leaped into the air. It did not dodge. With a terrifying power, it swung a slap with its front legs full of sharp claws. A cold, tearing sound echoed through the quiet noon space. The backpack, made of super durable canvas, was torn like a thin piece of paper right in the air. Under the brilliant and naked sunlight, a chaotic and painfully beautiful scene took place. A series of expensive photography accessories flew everywhere. Glass elements from camera lenses were shattered, reflecting the sunlight, sparkling like diamond fragments falling to the ground. Batteries, memory cards, and rolls of cables flew everywhere, creating small dust trails when they hit the ground. The lion landed, its feet crushing the lens filter, a dry snapping sound echoing amidst John's gasping breath. He fell backward, his trembling hands reaching up to cover his face hopelessly. But right in the middle of that ruin, from the torn compartment of the backpack, a small and light object flew out. It was an old photo, the corners frayed and the colors yellowed over time. The photo floated in the hot air and then slowly landed, lying face up right in front of the beast that was burning with murderous intent. It was a photo taken 10 years ago, capturing the image of a young man with a radiant smile holding a small, weak lion cub. That photo was an inseparable item for John, a reminder of the reason he was attached to this land. The male lion stopped, its glowing yellow eyes narrowing because of the light reflecting from the yellowed photo. It did not lunge at John a second time. Instead, it lowered its head, its nose sniffing at the small piece of paper lying lonely on the scorched grass. The murderous intent in the air seemed to be frozen, giving way to an invisible doubt rising in the consciousness of the predator. The steps suddenly fell into a strange state of stillness. The lion, who just now was an embodiment of death, suddenly came to a complete halt. It did not rush forward to finish off the man trembling at its feet, but instead bowed its majestic head low, amber eyes fixed on the old photo lying among the dust and broken glass fragments. Under the harsh sunlight, the yellowed photo appeared clearly. In the photo, a young John was bandaging a wound for a weak lion cub. That lion cub had an unmistakable feature, a deep V-shaped scar on its left ear, a painful trace from a poacher's wire trap. The beast sniffed continuously, its powerful breath blowing away the thin layers of dust on the photo. Then, as if to confirm something belonging to a deep instinct, it took another step closer to John. John held his breath, his body stiff with fear, but his eyes did not leave the animal. At a distance, so close that he could count each of its whiskers, the lion did not open its mouth to growl. It brought its nose to take a deep breath at the hollow of John's neck, where sweat was pouring down due to the heat and fear. At that very moment, a miraculous transformation occurred. The pupils of the lion dilated and contracted continuously. Amidst the scent of the steppe and fear, it had found a familiar layer of fragrance buried under 10 years of dust of time. The scent of the person who had once warmed it during cold winter nights. The person who had used trembling hands to feed it each piece of meat when it no longer had the strength to stand firm. The murderous intent in the beast's eyes vanished completely, giving way to an unimaginable tenderness. It narrowed its eyes slightly, emitting a low purring sound from deep within its chest, a sound normally reserved for members of the pride. John, now as if having just returned from the dead, stared at the left ear of the lion glowing under the noon sun. There, an old, calloused V-shaped scar appeared clearly, perfectly matching the image in the photo on the ground. "Asani?" John uttered, his voice hoarse, choking between tears and sweat. "Asani, is it really you, my boy?" As soon as that name echoed, the lion tilted its head as if a key had just opened the last door of memory. It was no longer the lord of the savannah hunting prey. In that moment, it became the little lion that John had once saved from the hands of death 10 years ago. The daylight, which was originally naked and cold, now was like a halo covering the unimaginable reunion between two species. John tremblingly reached out his hand, not to shield himself, but to touch this miraculous reality. He realized that, even though time had changed the shape and strength, the bond of kindness and decency had never been broken in the wild nature. Instead of a fatal pounce or a roar that tore through space, Asani stepped forward slowly, majestic but full of gentleness. It approached John, who was still sitting on the ground amidst the ruins of the photography equipment. Then, an act no one could believe happened. The giant male lion brought its heavy head with its thick mane to rub hard against John's shoulder. It was a characteristic, affectionate gesture of large cats, a way of saying welcome, old friend of the Lord of the Steppe. John tremblingly reached out his hand. His fingers sank deep into Asani's thick, stiff mane that was hot from the noon sun. The sense of reality rushed back intensely. The heat of the lion's body blended with the heat of the steppe, but now it no longer brought a sense of suffocation, but a strange feeling of safety, like a protective arm in the middle of a dangerous land. He remembered the skin-scorching sun of 10 years ago, when he found a lion cub exhausted from blood loss next to a steel trap. That day, he had shared his last drops of water with him. And today, under that very sun, it had given him back his life. The two of them sat there, in the middle of a steppe white with sunlight. The zebras in the distance had stopped, staring in bewilderment at the water hole, where a human and a beast were present together in an absurd but beautiful harmony. John picked up the yellowed photo, carefully dusting off the layer of dirt on the surface. He looked at the photo, then looked at Asani. The lion cub of that day was now a king, strong and proud, but deep in those amber eyes was still the soul of the child he had once saved. John looked around at his damaged equipment. Lenses worth thousands of dollars were shattered. The backpack was completely torn, but he did not feel a bit of regret. The most wonderful photos do not necessarily have to be on a memory card. They have been etched into his heart and mind forever. He picked up the camera with the cracked screen, trying to press the shutter button one last time. The shutter sound went click in the quiet space. Capturing the moment, Asani lay down next to him, eyes half closed under the noon sun like a loyal bodyguard. As the sun began to tilt its shadow, signaling the end of a day full of events, John knew that this story would change his life forever. He stood up, lightly patting Asani's shoulder one last time before packing what was left. The lion stood up, roaring softly as a farewell, and then slowly walked toward the horizon, where the sun was beginning to cool down. Amidst the harshness of the steppe, where survival instinct is the only rule, the story of John and Asani reminds us of a power even greater than fangs and claws. That is compassion. The naked sun of noon can expose all dangers, but it also illuminates a touching truth that kindness never disappears. What we give with the heart will be remembered by nature with the soul. Gratitude is an invisible bridge that can blur the boundary between humans and beasts, turning enemies into soulmates. Believe that every act of kindness you sow today is a seed of salvation for yourself in the future. Under the scorching sun of the Masai Mara, the Kenyan sky looked like a sunburnt film strip flickering with heat. Rivers that were once gentle were now nothing but cracked, barren ditches. In the suffocating silence of the dry season, a migrating elephant herd moved heavily toward the horizon, where the hope of a drop of water remained distant. Kibbo, a young elephant with soft ears and a curious soul, could not resist the pull of a gray-green mud puddle appearing in the middle of the dry riverbed. To a child with a throat burning from thirst, it was a blessing. But the wild wilderness always hides the most cruel traps behind a peaceful appearance. As soon as the small feet of Kibbo touched that surface, the mud did not support him. It cracked open, swallowing his legs and then his entire body. It was not water, but a thick sinkhole, a dark mouth of Mother Earth waiting patiently for prey. Kibbo panicked. The more he struggled, the tighter the suction of the mud became, pulling him deeper. He stretched his small trunk toward the sky, emitting a desperate cry, a sound that tore through the silence of the savannah. The amber eyes of Kibbo widened, filled with ultimate fear as he saw his herd moving far away over the hill. In that moment, death was no longer a distant concept. but a cold feeling gradually filling his chest. However, amid that despair, a majestic figure suddenly appeared above the brink. The figure that just appeared on the edge of the mud pit was Kaisa, a male lion who had lived through more than half his life. On the Masai Mara savanna, the name Kaisa was once the terror of all large livestock. But now, the scars crisscrossing his face and his mane torn from battles for territory had turned him into a contemplative loner. Kaisa had lost everything. His cubs were swept away by floodwaters in a devastating rainy season, and his status as leader had fallen to younger, more aggressive lions. Kaisa slowly approached the edge of the mud pit. The instinct of a top predator rose in his veins. A trapped baby elephant was a hearty meal without effort, a blessing granted by nature to an old hunter exhausted by hunger. Kaisa looked down at Kibbo. His dull, golden eyes met the tearful eyes of the young elephant. In that moment, something strange happened. The cry of Kibbo was no longer the sound of prey. It sounded exactly like the desperate whimpering of the children Kaisa had helplessly watched sink under the floodwaters years ago. People often say nature has no compassion, only survival. But for Kaisa, survival suddenly became meaningless if he let another small living being die under the coldness of the mud. Kaisa did not roar. He lowered his center of gravity, his sharp claws digging into the hard, dry ground above to maintain balance. He knew that if he slipped, he himself would become a victim of this dark trap. Instead of lunging at the throat to finish the prey, Kaisa performed an action that would shock anyone witnessing it. He leaned his face down, gently but firmly using his strong teeth to grip the trunk of Kibbo. He did not bite deep to cause injury. He used his lips and incisors to clamp tightly, just like the way a mother lion carries her cubs. The tug of war with death began. Kaisa put all his strength into his powerful shoulders and hind legs, which were trembling from pressure. Every time he pulled up an inch, the mud pit hissed with greedy sounds, as if wanting to hold the prey tight. Kibbo, in pain and shock, suddenly felt a surge of power pulling him up from the darkness. The baby elephant stopped struggling instinctively, as if he understood that this predator was his only lifeline. Sweat mixed with dust flowed down the forehead of Kaisa, his breath becoming heavy and hot right next to the face of Kibbo. In the silence of the savannah, only the racing heartbeats of two creatures who were originally enemies, now bonding in an extraordinary effort of survival, could be heard. Kaisa knew he was gambling with his life, because his strength was limited, and every passing second, the mud became heavier. But the old king did not give up. He was atoning for the past by saving the future of a child who did not belong to his species. Right at the moment Kaisa was using his last bit of strength to pull Kibbo out of the thick mud, the ground began to shake. From behind the acacia trees, a cloud of dust rose high into the sky, accompanied by iron-like roars that shook the humid air. The mother elephant had returned. In the world of elephants, maternal love is a sacred and inviolable religion. When the mother elephant realized the absence of Kibbo and followed the cry for help back, the scene hitting her eyes was a worse nightmare. From a distance of hundreds of meters, the mother could not see the life-saving effort of Kaisa. She only saw a large male lion gripping the trunk of her child. In the subconscious of a lead elephant, it was an image of a massacre. A predator was trying to execute her son in the most brutal way. The mother elephant charged like a giant tank without brakes. Her ears spread wide like two sails, her trunk raised high, and her long sharp tusks pointed straight at the enemy. Each of her footsteps hitting the ground created shocks, causing small birds nearby to fly away in terror. The rage of a mother is a power that can crush any king of the savannah. Kaisa heard the roar, felt the ground shaking under his feet. He knew well that death was rushing toward him at a terrifying speed. If he were a young and wise lion, he would have let go of the prey immediately to escape into the bushes. But Kaisa did not do that. He looked down at Kibbo, the baby elephant still stuck halfway in the black mud. If he let go now, due to the momentum of suction and panic, Kibbo would sink and perhaps his head would plunge straight into the deep mud before the mother could reach him. Do not let go. Save him. An unfamiliar instinct, rising above even the fear of death, screamed in the mind of Kaisa. The old lion clenched his teeth tighter, his front legs sinking into the hard edge of the earth until they bled. He ignored the pain, ignored the roaring coming close to his ears. Kaisa concentrated all remaining life into his muscles, a pull so strong that his neck bones cracked. The price of kindness in the wild is often very expensive. Kaisa accepted trading his life for a chance for the child. He did not run away. He chose to stay to finish his job. The distance between the mother elephant and Kaisa was now only measured in meters. The eyes of the mother elephant burned with hatred, while the eyes of Kaisa only had exhaustion and peace. A great misunderstanding was taking place in the heart of the savannah, where a heroic act was being interpreted as a barbaric crime. Kaisa closed his eyes, preparing to receive the horrific blow from the mother going mad with love for her child, while Kibo had just been pulled completely on a hard ground, stunned by the rapid turn of fate. The sound of collision rang out like a dry thunderclap in the wilderness, as Kibo was just completely pulled from the mud pit. It was also the time the mother elephant arrived with all the weight of 3 tons of flesh and bone and extreme rage. Kaisa did not have time to dodge, or perhaps he no longer had the strength to dodge. The headbutt from the giant head of the mother elephant slammed straight into the ribs of the lion, causing the majestic body of the old king to fly away like a dry leaf in a whirlwind. Kaisa hit the trunk of an ancient baobab tree hard, the sound of ribs breaking echoing chillingly. He fell to the ground, dust covering his body full of mud and blood. The mother elephant did not stop there. She let out a heartbreaking roar, immediately reaching out her giant trunk, intending to wrap tightly around the one she thought was a killer to toss him until death. Her pillar-like legs lifted up, ready to crush the chest of the beast, lying gasping for air. In the eyes of the mother elephant now, Kaisa was just a monster pretending to be dead after harming her child. She did not see the mud stains covering the face of the lion, nor did she realize that those very teeth had exhausted themselves to hold the life of Kibo. But just as the foot of the mother elephant was about to deliver the final blow, a small figure, smeared with mud, staggered out. It was Kibo, despite still trembling after the near-death shock. The young elephant used all his strength to stand between his mother and the lion lying on the ground. Kibo did not run to the safe arms of his mother. He chose to stand and protect the one who had just bitten his trunk. The mother elephant froze, her giant foot hanging in the air just centimeters from the head of Kaisa. She was bewildered, her heavy breath blowing out heat like a furnace. She did not understand why her beloved child was protecting the enemy. Kibo stretched his small trunk, gently wrapping it around the leg of his mother, then turned to touch the bleeding nose of Kaisa. He made low, rapid sounds, a special language of elephants used to soothe and explain. In that strangely quiet moment, time seemed to stop on the savannah. The mother elephant lowered her foot to the ground. She looked at Kibo, then looked down at the old lion looking at her with peaceful eyes, without a bit of aggression or resentment. She saw the mud trail stretching from the pit up to the mane of Kaisa, saw the footprints of the lion that had held on until bleeding by the edge. A late but powerful understanding crept into the mind of the mother elephant. She realized the mark on the trunk of her child was not a bite of a predator, but the mark of an unprecedented rescue effort. The ultimate anger vanished, replaced by a shock and deep respect for the one on the other side of the natural law. Kaisa, though in pain, still blinked softly as a farewell from one king to another king. In the unusually quiet space of sunset, the blind rage of the lead female elephant gradually faded, making way for the awakening of a leader who had weathered many storms. She looked down at her feet, then back at the fresh blood mixed with mud on the mane of Kaisa. With the experience of one who had led the herd through thousands of miles of savannah, she realized that if the lion really wanted to kill Kibo, he would not have stayed to take the blow. That silent understanding spread through her veins, causing her to lower her giant trunk. not to attack, but to perform a rare peace ritual between two species representing the power of nature. The mother elephant slowly stepped back a few paces, keeping a respectful distance from the injured lion. She used her trunk to grab a handful of dry leaves and dust, gently tossing them into the air toward Kaisa, an ancient gesture of elephants to express gratitude and soothe the wounds of the opponent. Her eyes now were no longer burning with hatred, but filled with a sense of regret and deep respect for the enemy who had just saved the future of her herd. She understood that, in this harsh world, kindness is the only language that does not need a roar or a shout to be expressed. Kibbo, after seeing his mother had calmed down, gently rubbed his head against the trembling legs of Kaisa as a farewell, then walked slowly toward his mother. The mother elephant used her trunk to wrap around her small child, guiding him away toward the horizon, where the darkness of the great forest was gradually falling. But every few steps, Kibbo turned his head back, his amber eyes looking deep into the lonely figure under the baobab tree, as if wanting to engrave the image of the savior into his heart. Kaisa stood up with difficulty, his breath still painful, but his dull golden eyes sparkled with a strange peace. He had traded his own safety to protect a small living being, and in the moment close to death, he had received a priceless gift, understanding from the elephant species. He did not roar to assert authority, only silently watched the figures of the two elephants disappear into the thin mist of late afternoon. The story of Kaisa and Kibbo will soon become a legend whispered among the acacia trees and dry rivers of the Masai Mara. It reminds us that, amid fierce survival, nobility always exists like an underground stream flowing through souls that know how to love. Sometimes, a small act of help can blur the boundary between predator and prey, turning ancient enemies into soulmates in a fateful moment. We often see the world through the lens of fear and existing prejudices. But if you have the courage to pause for a beat, observing with your heart instead of with anger, you will see that kindness is always present in places few expect. Never judge an action only by its appearance, because behind a threatening bite may be an entire heart trying to save a life. Thank you for following the touching story of Kaisa and Kibbo. If the moment Kibbo stood up to protect the lion touched your heart, please press like and share this video to spread the message of understanding. Do not forget to subscribe to the channel to not miss other miraculous journeys on the green savanna. Please leave a comment. Kindness will win if you believe that kindness always has the power to change the world. See you in the next stories. The gates to the Serengeti opened under a brilliant sunset, a vast sea of gold stretching to the horizon where wild nature still maintained its immutable pride against human ambitions. Amidst that immense space, the small field clinic appeared lonely like a final oasis of hope. Inside, the steady beep of the heart monitor was the only sound breaking the suffocating silence until a small dark shadow slipped through the slightly open window. That was Quito, a scrawny lion cub with eyes carrying strange determination. Robert, the billionaire once nicknamed the Desert Bulldozer, who previously only saw this land through the lens of luxury resort projects and profit margins, now lay motionless in a deep coma. To the world, he was a powerful real estate tycoon, but to this lion cub, he was a benefactor. In a moment of absolute stillness, Quito stretched, placing its soft, dusty little paw directly on the weathered face of Robert. As soon as the soft fur touched his skin, an unthinkable thing happened. A single tear rolled down the cheek of the man nearing death, an emotional response that defied every dry medical diagnosis. The nurse rushed over intending to drive the animal away.
Stop!
But Dr. Kojo
Look at these vitals.
kindly
Something
held
is
her
wrong.
hand, stopping her in amazement. Wait, he whispered, eyes never leaving the monitor. Machines say he has gone away, but this lion seems to have found a path to bring him back. Look at his face. He is still here. This was the beginning of a miracle, an invisible thread starting to be woven between a broken human soul and the wild heart of Earth. Maya stepped into the clinic, her boots covered in the red dust of the plains she had spent her youth protecting. The silence between her and her father had lasted 5 long years, a gap filled with heated arguments about plans to turn this sanctuary into a playground for the ultra-rich. Seeing him now, fragile under 4 tubes, Maya felt a wave of mixed emotions between grief and anger. But the sight of Keto curled up at the foot of her father bed made her stop. "Why is there a predator in his room?" she asked with a questioning voice. Dr. Kojo did not answer directly. He only silently handed her an old, scratched camera found at the accident scene. As Maya scrolled through the photo library, the image of the father she thought she knew began to crack and shatter. Instead of terrain surveys or soil samples for resort projects, the camera was full of pictures of Keto. She found video diary entries that Robert had secretly recorded for weeks before the tragedy occurred. In those shaky and blurry films, the iron billionaire sat on a rock, clumsily holding a milk bottle to feed the orphaned lion cub. His voice, always sharp and powerful in board meetings, now became strangely soft and trembling. In these recordings, Robert confessed to Keto things he never had enough courage to say to Maya. He spoke of the suffocating weight of success, the extreme loneliness at the peak of power, and the regret eating his soul for choosing profit over the respect of his daughter. He told the lion cub about the moment he rescued it from the iron trap of poachers. That was the first time in 30 years he felt he was truly living as a human. Maya watched her father on the screen, her tears falling non-stop as she heard him tell the lion that he hoped one day he could become as brave as its own wildness. Maya realized a bitter but redemptive truth. While she fought against him from the outside, the Serengeti had silently changed him from the within. The lion cub was not just an animal he happened to meet. Keto was the final effort of Robert to relearn how to be a father, and Robert was the only hope for Keto to have a family after losing his mother. This secret bond was woven from broken bonds, where a man labeled the destroyer of nature found salvation from the very subject he once intended to exploit. The presence of Keto beside Robert now was no longer absurd, but the most sacred protection a living being could give to the person who gave it life. Maya sat down beside the bed, her hand trembling as she placed it on her father's shoulder. For the first time in many years, she felt her heart and her father's heart beating with the same rhythm under the Serengeti sky. The rare piece at the field clinic was ripped apart by the roar of black SUV engines gliding over the red dust. Mark Thorne, a longtime partner and also the one who craved the CEO chair if Robert never woke up, stepped down with a calculated face. Mark did not see a miracle in the hospital room. He only saw an obstacle to be removed. He came with a team of lawyers and a group of aggressive private guards, presenting forged documents signed while Robert was in a coma to forcibly seize control of the sanctuary land. Mark Thorne used the reason of medical safety to attack the weakest point of Robert. He declared that allowing a wild predator in the clinic was a serious violation of legal regulations and endangered the lives of the patient as well as the staff. He demanded the immediate relocation of Robert back to the city and ordered the termination of Keto to ensure a sterile environment. Maya stood blocking the door of the hospital room, her eyes burning with indignation. She knew well if Robert left this place, left the spiritual connection with Keto and the atmosphere of the Serengeti, he would never wake up. Mark did not want to save Robert. He wanted him to die legally in a distant air-conditioned room, so the resort project could be restarted. The confrontation became tense when Mark ordered the guards to use force to enter. Keto, seemingly sensing the malice directed at its benefactor, did not run away. The scrawny lion cub stood firm on 4 legs right at the foot of Robert's bed, neck hair bristling and emitting small but threatening growls. One of the guards, in haste and cruelty, used a heavy electric cattle prod to deliver a fatal blow to the back leg of Keto as it tried to stop them from touching the bed of Robert. The lion cub collapsed, its cry of pain echoing throughout the small room. Maya screamed. She rushed to hug Keto, using her own body to shield the lion cub from further blows. "You are devils," she yelled through tears of frustration. Dr. Kojo also intervened, declaring that he would take full legal responsibility if anything happened, forcing Mark and his gang to temporarily step back to avoid a media scandal at the scene. However, the situation had now become worse than ever. Keto was severely injured, breathing became difficult, and the heart rate of Robert on the monitor also began to drop dangerously like a chain reaction. Maya knew she did not have much time. She could not rely on any resources from the corporation of her father. In the most desperate moment, she decided to use all her savings from many years as a photographer to call a team of top veterinary experts from Nairobi by private helicopter in the night. She had to save the life of Keto at any cost, because she understood that the breath of this little lion was the only flame still warming the cold soul of her father. That night, the Serengeti was submerged in a thunderstorm. Maya sat in the middle of the room, one hand holding the cold hand of her father, the other hand stroking the bloody fur of Keto, praying for a miracle that could help both cross the threshold of death. The air in the hospital room became heavier than ever, covered by the smell of antiseptic and the thick humidity of the recently ended forest rain. Keto had just undergone a surgery lasting hours to fix the broken back leg bone. The lion cub lay there, tiny and weak with white bandages wrapped around its body, its breath only pulsating intermittent beats. Meanwhile, the indicators on the screen of Robert began to fall into the danger zone. The lines on the heart monitor gradually lengthened, slow and soulless. The doctor seemed to have started giving up, while Mark Thorne stood in the corner of the room, constantly checking his watch with a hidden triumphant smile, ready for the final procedures to sign the death certificate for an entire empire. Maya had spent the whole night without sleep. She sat between two fading lives, one hand holding the tiny paw of Keto, the other hand clutching the cold hand of her father. She was no longer crying. Only a terrifying silence covered her soul. She whispered into the ear of her father about the golden grasslands, about the photos they had not yet taken together, and about Keto, the being who fought to its last breath to protect him. She pleaded for a response, a tiny sign to know that he was still hearing her amidst the vast darkness of the coma. Just when hope seemed to have run out, Keto suddenly moved. Despite the pain and exhaustion due to the effects of anesthesia, the lion cub seemed to sense the life of its benefactor drifting away. With an extraordinary effort, Keto used its trembling front legs to crawl towards the head of the bed, close to the face of Robert. It stretched its neck, emitting a small, hoarse, and weak roar, a broken sound but carrying the weight of a summons, a call of the pride in the abyss. At the very moment that sound echoed, the heart monitor screen of Robert suddenly jumped a sharp beat. His fingers, which had been motionless for many months, suddenly contracted, clutching the hand of Maya with extraordinary strength. And then, to the utter astonishment of the medical team, Robert slowly opened his eyes. His eyes were initially cloudy and disoriented, but immediately located the light yellow fur of the little lion pressed against his face. A silence covered the whole room, so deep that one could hear the beats of hearts merging into one rhythm. Robert moved his dry lips, emitting a hoarse but clear sound. Keto, hot tears rolled down his cheeks, not the tears of an unconscious patient, but the tears of a person who had just found the way back home after a long journey in the darkness. The presence of Keto was like a spiritual anchor, pulling Robert from the abyss of death by an invisible connection that science could not explain. Witnessing that scene, Mark Thorne stood frozen. The folder in his hand fell to the floor, marking the end of dark plots. Robert turned to look at Maya, then looked down at the small lion, licking his hand. For the first time in many years, he did not ask about the corporation, did not ask about the trillion-dollar project, but only weakly asked, Keto, is it okay? That question made Maya burst into happiness. The miracle had truly happened, not thanks to the most expensive medicines, but thanks to the magical intersection between two lonely souls in the heart of the Serengeti. 6 months passed since the fateful night at the field clinic. The golden dawn of the Serengeti once again covered a newly completed structure. But it was not a luxury resort with infinity pools or concrete buildings invading nature. Instead, it was an architecture blending perfectly with the landscape, named the Keto Conservation and Therapy Foundation. Robert sat on a large wooden porch, his appearance completely changed. No longer in expensive suits or with the stressed face of a real estate billionaire. He now wore a simple linen shirt, holding binoculars, his eyes radiating a peace never seen before. The incident that almost took his life helped Robert realize a truth that money could never buy. Immediately after recovering, the first thing he did was use his position as chairman of the corporation to permanently cancel the high-end resort project. Instead, he used a large part of his personal fortune to establish this conservation center. This was not only a place to rescue injured or orphaned wildlife, but also a special psychological therapy center for children experiencing trauma. Robert understood that if a lion cub could awaken the cold soul of an iron billionaire, then wild nature could heal anyone. Maya sat next to her father, their hands no longer distant. The relationship between the two had been mended not by hollow apologies, but by deep understanding through a common ideal. They managed the center together, spending the day monitoring the recovery of animals and welcoming groups of children from all over the world coming to find faith in life. Maya realized that her father was no longer the destroyer of nature she once hated. He had become the most loyal protector of this land. From a distance, under the shade of an ancient acacia tree, a majestic figure was slowly moving towards the porch. That was Keto. The lion cub of that day had grown larger, its legs completely healed and walking with pride across the grassland. Although it had begun to show the instincts of a future king of the jungle, Keto still stopped in front of the porch, rubbing its head against the hand of Robert and emitting a gentle purr as a reminder of an unbreakable bond. To Robert, Keto was not just an animal he once saved, but the benefactor who saved his soul, teaching him that life is priceless and the connection between species is the most sacred thing. The story of the billionaire who woke up from a coma thanks to a lion cub became a new legend of the Serengeti, bringing faith to millions about the power of love and forgiveness. Robert often sat quietly watching the sunset, feeling the breath of the Great Plains and smiling. He realized that true power did not lie in how much land one owned or how many skyscrapers one built, but in how many lives one could protect and how many bridges of love without borders one could build. Under the vast African sky, Robert finally found the true meaning of the kingdom he wanted to leave for the world. A legacy of kindness, where humans and nature live together in absolute respect and peace. Under the scorching sun of Kruger National Park in South Africa, the sky was no longer a gentle blue, but had turned a stark flaming white. The temperature had exceeded 40 degrees Celsius, causing the air above the arid ground to vibrate continuously like a heated silk ribbon. Jack, a ranger with sun-bronzed skin and eyes accustomed to the harshness of the savannah, was driving an old Land Rover through scorched thorn bushes. The roar of the engine seemed to lose its breath amidst this suffocating silence. Jack stopped the vehicle when he spotted a strange dark shape in the distance. It was not dry grass, but vultures, the uninvited guests of death, beginning to land on the withered acacia branches, silently waiting for a cruel feast. He held his binoculars, his hands trembling slightly due to the heat and anxiety. Emerging in the lens was a dark yellow form lying motionless on the cracked earth. Coming closer, Jack's heart tightened. It was an adult lioness, the ruler of this land, but now she looked so small and fragile. Up close, her eyes were dull, seemingly covered by a film of dust and exhaustion. Her jaws were slightly open, her breath intermittent, and so weak it was hard to recognize. Jack knelt down, carefully observing the surrounding tracks. There was no blood, no poacher footprints, and no bullet wounds. She is suffering from severe heat stroke, Jack whispered in a raspy voice. Her natural cooling system has collapsed before the fury of the sun. A race against time officially began, because here, every passing minute could be the final minute of a dynasty. The silence of the savannah at this moment no longer carried a sense of peace. Instead, it was thick with a deadly pressure. Jack knew he did not have much time. At this temperature threshold, The internal organs of the lioness were being cooked from the inside. He took a deep breath, suppressing his worry to make room for professional skills honed over decades. First, Jack had to ensure safety. Even though the animal was near death, the instinct of a predator could rise at any time if she felt threatened in her delirium. He stood at a distance, loading a mild sedative into a specialized rifle. A dry pop sounded, the needle pinning accurately into the thigh of the lion. After 10 minutes of tense waiting, when certain she was completely in a deep sleep, Jack dared to approach. His first action was to establish a temporary oasis. Jack quickly pulled a large tarp from the truck, using iron stakes and ropes to tie it firmly to the acacia tree and the pickup body to create a vast shade. A temperature difference of even a few degrees was a miracle right now. Next, he carried heavy water cans from the truck. Instead of pouring it all at once, Jack poured water slowly, but continuously onto large blood vessel areas such as the groin and armpits of the lion, while using wet towels to wipe the scorched sand off the golden fur. Watching the cool water soak into the withered fur and evaporate immediately under the heat, Jack muttered, "Hang in there, girl. Water is here, do not give up." However, the greatest challenge lay ahead, lifting a creature weighing nearly 150 kilograms onto the truck. Jack lowered the tailgate of the pickup and installed a steel sliding ramp system. He spread a specialized rescue stretcher on the ground. Then with all his strength, he used his shoulders and hips to roll the heavy body of the lioness onto the stretcher, fastening the safety straps to ensure she would not flip over. Now it was time for the winch system to work. Jack hooked the iron hook to the stretcher, looping the cable over a load-bearing bar at the back of the truck to create lifting force. The winch motor started to hum, breaking the thick atmosphere. The cable tightened like a guitar string, and the stretcher began to inch up the ramp. Jack controlled the remote while using his entire body weight to keep the stretcher from sliding off the track. Sweat poured down his forehead, stinging his eyes, but he did not dare let go for a single second. Amidst the sound of the winch, another sound rose that made Jack's spine go cold. The savage laughter of hyenas from the bushes behind. They had smelled the water and the scent of a weak lion. Jack glanced at the rifle leaning against the door, then back at the lioness on the stretcher. He could not give up. He sped up the winch, gritted his teeth, and gave one final push. When a stretcher finally sat securely in the truck bed, Jack slammed the tailgate shut. He grabbed a rifle and fired a shot into the air to scare away the hungry eyes lurking in the brush. The pickup began to move, leaving behind the disappointed vultures. In the rearview mirror, Jack saw red dust swirling up, obscuring the figures of the regretful hyenas. The first race was won, but the real battle to reclaim life for this queen had only just begun at the medical station. Jack's pickup stopped in front of the wildlife rescue station when the sunset had dyed a corner of the sky crimson, casting long, tilting shadows on the ground. The atmosphere here was completely different from the brutality of the savannah. It was a specially designed recovery enclosure with a solid roof, heat-dissipating stone walls, and large industrial fans running at full speed, creating a constant flow of cool air. With the help of the pulley system at the station, Jack moved the lioness onto a cool stone floor, the place that would be her recovery room in the coming days. The real battle now shifted to medicine and patience. Jack was no longer a brawny winch operator, but became as meticulous as a true nurse. He knelt beside the lioness, carefully shaving a small patch of fur on her front leg to find a vein. Under the dim yellow light of the clinic, the needle pierced the thick skin accurately, and immediately after, drops of intravenous fluid began to flow steadily, bringing life into the exhausted body. "This is hope, girl," Jack whispered as he watched the saline and life-saving vitamins permeate the parched bloodstream of the beast. Night fell over the Kruger Savannah. While the world outside was filled with roars and brutal hunts, the inside of the clinic held only the sound of rotating fans and the wheezing breath of the special patient. Jack did not go to sleep. He sat on the floor, leaning his back against the iron door, holding his ranger journal, but his eyes never leaving the chest of the lioness. He used a soft cotton towel soaked in warm water to begin cleaning her body. It was a task requiring absolute tenderness. Jack gently wiped away the red dust clinging to every strand of fur. As the grime washed away, the majestic beauty of a queen gradually emerged under the dim light. Old scars on her shoulders told of battles to protect the pride and territory. A life full of pride now, depending entirely on the compassion of a human. Around 2 in the morning, a small change occurred that made the space suddenly so quiet that one could hear a heartbeat. Jack stood up abruptly when he saw the ears of the lioness twitch, a natural reflex as the nervous system began to wake. Next, a small growl, a vibration from deep in the throat, was emitted. It was not the powerful roar of a predator, but the weak plea of a living soul trying to reconnect with reality. Jack held his breath, motionless. The dull eyes from the afternoon now slowly opened, reflecting the flickering light. In that moment, the gaze of the lioness met Jack's eyes. There was no aggression, no predatory instinct. Only an extreme confusion gradually replaced by a moment of stillness as she felt the coolness and the care from the man before her. She tried to lift her head, but then slumped back down tiredly, her breathing becoming more rhythmic and deep. Jack smiled, a satisfied smile appearing on his weary face. He knew her heart was strong enough to keep beating, and her reign on the savannah could not yet end. A week passed since that fateful day under the sun-scorched acacia tree. Time seemed to stand still in the recovery enclosure, where every millimeter of the lion's movement was carefully recorded by Jack. Thanks to tireless care and abundant nutrition, vitality returned to the beast miraculously. The muscles under the golden fur began to firm up again, rippling with strength after each of her restless laps in the confined space. Jack knew that the recovery of a predator lay not just in the body, but in the spirit. The wildness in those amber eyes had ignited again, and she no longer belonged to a place with neon lights or electric fans. On that morning, the Kruger sky was cooler than usual, as if nature itself was preparing for a great return. Jack and the support team placed the lioness into a large, reinforced iron cage and set on the truck bed. He drove back to the exact coordinates where he had found her, the place where the boundary between life and death was once as thin as a hair. Along the way, Jack did not say a word, occasionally glancing in the rearview mirror to ensure his special friend was all right. When the truck stopped, the vast savanna opened up with winds carrying the scent of dry grass and the characteristic warmth of the Mother Earth. Jack stepped down from the truck and climbed onto the cabin roof to ensure a safe distance. He took a deep breath, feeling the vibration of the space, then slowly pulled the chain controlling the cage door. A soft thud sounded as the iron door slid open. There was no rush or panic. The lioness stepped out slowly, full of authority. She paused at the threshold of the iron cage, sniffing the air of freedom, her eyes squinting against the brilliant sunlight pouring down on the golden fields of grass. The first steps touching the familiar hot ground seemed to carry a confirmation of her mastery over this land. But then a miraculous thing happened that made time stop. Instead of bolting into the bushes, the lioness suddenly stood still. She turned her body, directing her deep amber eyes toward Jack. In that moment, the space was so silent that one could hear the wind rustling through the thorn bushes. There was no threatening roar, nor the aggression of a wild beast. It was a look full of understanding, a silent acknowledgement between two beings who had walked across the line of life and death together. Jack stood motionless on the truck roof, his heart pounding, but his soul strangely at peace. He nodded slightly, a gesture of respect for the Lord of the Savannah. As if having received a final farewell, the lioness turned her head. She began to trot, a graceful and powerful gait toward the horizon. From afar, behind dense thickets, the calls of the pride began to sound. Jack narrowed his eyes to watch, seeing the faint silhouettes of other pride members waiting for their queen to return. The figure of the lioness grew smaller, merging into the yellow of the burnt grass and the brilliant sunset beginning to fall. Sovereignty was returned to its rightful owner, and Jack knew his mission was completed in the most perfect way. Jack's truck was still idling quietly in the vast space, but he did not want to leave just yet. He leaned against the hood, pulled out a dented thermos, took a sip of water, and looked toward the horizon where the figure of the lioness had just vanished into the wilderness. The Kruger sunset never disappointed. It was brilliant and magnificent like an oil painting, dyeing the ancient baobab trees red and plating the burnt grass in gold. In the stillness of the late afternoon, Jack felt a relief spreading through his chest, a feeling that no money or fame could buy. He began to reflect on the fragility of life. Only a week ago, the most powerful creature of the savannah lay there, helpless against the heat of the sun, waiting for death under the claws of vultures. People often think we are the rulers of nature, Jack said softly to himself, his voice vanishing into the wind. But in reality, we are just lucky protectors. This rescue was not just about saving the life of an animal, but about maintaining the balance of an ecosystem that was already too wounded. Every individual returned is an affirmation that human compassion can still heal the scars that climate change or greed are causing. The story of the lioness would soon become part of the thick ranger journals at the rescue station. But for Jack, it was a profound lesson in connection. He remembered her final look, a moment where all barriers of language and race disappeared, leaving only pure respect between two living souls. That was the most precious reward, recognition from a wild ruler. It reminded him that in a modern world full of noise and division, primitive and good values still exist, if only we are willing to stop and reach out to help. Night began to fall quickly, the first stars of the South African sky starting to sparkle like diamonds on black velvet. Jack climbed into the cabin, turning the truck to return to the station. He knew that tomorrow there would be new challenges, other animals needing help, and the battle for conservation would never end. However, every time he felt tired or discouraged, he would remember the image of the lioness trotting toward her pride, toward her freedom and sovereignty. That was the fire that warmed his soul during lonely patrol nights. Before pressing the gas, Jack looked into the dash cam mounted on the vehicle, sharing final heartfelt words. The savannah is vast, but it is also very fragile. If you find faith from the journey of the lioness today, remember that each of our small actions can create ripples of change. Do not let your kindness be frozen or withered. Be the source of cool water. Be the shade for those who are weaker than you. The pickup rolled forward, its headlights cutting through the pitch-black night of Kruger. The story closed, but its spirit remained, spreading and urging us to believe in a future where humans and nature can coexist in harmony and love. Thank you for accompanying Jack on this meaningful patrol. The savannah is still waiting, and we will meet again. People often say that the memory of the deep forest is inherently short. Amidst the harsh struggle for survival, wild instincts quickly erase all traces of affection, turning a hand that once fondled a wild beast into a fading memory, or worse, nothing more than the target of a predator. However, there are stories born to defy those cruel laws. This is the story of Elena and Amari. Everything began on a stormy night many years ago when the sky seemed to collapse in the sound of thunder tearing across the great forest. Amidst the mud of a flash flood, a small living being was trembling while fighting against death. It was a lion cub, so tiny it could fit in two hands, left alone in the cold nature. At that moment, Elena appeared. She did not see a future wild beast. She only saw a soul crying out in despair. The choice to save the lion by Elena was not the decision of an expert, but a call from compassion. She brought him home, warmed him, and named him Amari, a name meaning strength. She did not know that from that moment, an invisible but strong bond was tied, overcoming all barriers between humans and nature. This is not just a journey of salvation, but a testament to a promise across time. It is for those who ever doubted whether sincere love could touch the wildest hearts. We begin this journey to see that there are feelings deeper than even the instinct for survival. The first days of Amari in the arms of Elena were not easy. That lion cub was so weak that even drinking milk from a bottle became a struggle for survival. Elena turned her house into an unofficial rescue station where sleepless nights became normal. She stayed awake all night to keep him warm, patiently bit by bit to instill into that small body the desire to live. In our culture, we always give favor to the weak who never give up, and Amari was the symbolic image of that spirit. Time passed, and Amari began to grow strong under the care of Elena. Initial fear was replaced by absolute trust. The lion cub of the past could now run and jump, and strangely, he followed Elena like a shadow that never left. Between them formed a miraculous emotional intersection. Can you imagine it? A creature that the world calls the Lord of the Forest found peace when resting its head on the legs of a woman, listening to her heartbeat as if it were the most soothing music in the world. The purrs of Amari vibrated the floor, creating a powerful connection and erasing prejudices about wild animals. However, true love is not possession but understanding. When Amari began to grow his first mane fibers, the symbol of majesty and power, Elena realized a painful truth. The paws of Amari were now larger than a human hand, and his eyes, though still looking at her with tenderness, sometimes looked far away toward the horizon. A cozy house or a small garden would never be enough for a king. Amari was born to belong to the vast sky of Africa, to run on the windy savannas, not to be imprisoned in the safety of humans. The pain of Elena was a type of unselfish love, a noble but extremely harsh value. She understood that she was raising Amari only to lose him forever one day. She taught him how to pounce on prey and how to react to the surrounding environment.
Good job.
Not so he could serve her, but so he could stand firm on his own feet in the wild world. That was the preparation for a foretold separation. That fateful day finally arrived. Elena took Amari back to a large nature reserve in Africa. Standing before the open cage, door facing the green grass, her heart tightened. She touched his golden fur for the last time, breathing in the scent of her wild child one last time. Amari stepped out, hesitated for a moment, then dashed into the tall grass without looking back once. Elena returned to the noisy city life, but the memory of Amari lingered, larger than any car horn or the surrounding bustle. She had given him freedom, and in return, she carried a vast void in her soul. Years passed like streams of sand flowing across the desert. Elena returned to the busy pace of life, where tall buildings blocked the view and engine noises replaced the rustling of leaves. But no matter how hard she tried, her mind was always haunted by unanswered questions. Did Amari survive the first winter? Did he find a pride to belong to? Or was he fighting alone against other predators? Every time it rained, Elena remembered that first night, remembering the warmth of the small creature that once trembled in her arms. In the world of numbers and logic that we live in, the story of Elena was often seen as an excessive dream. When she shared her longing for Amari, she often received sympathetic shakes of the head or realistic advice that was cold. Friends, experts, and even strangers told her, "Do not hope anymore. He is a lion, a natural killer. His instinct is to hunt and protect territory. He forgot you the moment he stepped into the savannah. If you go back, he will not see a savior. He will only see an easy meal." Social doubt was like a heavy pressure on the shoulders of Elena. We often promote reason, and reason says a wild beast has no place for sentimentality. Yet, the heart has reasons that reason can never understand. Elena felt an irresistible urge, a call from the depths of her soul that she called the vulnerability of faith. She needed to know the truth, not to bring Amari back, but to see with her own eyes that the kindness she planted had truly blossomed. Finally, Elena decided to make a trip that everyone called crazy. She saved money and put aside work to fly half across the planet, returning to the land of sun and wind in Africa. That journey was long, from tiring flights to hours sitting on a jolting jeep through dusty red trails. Every mile closer to the reserve made her heart skip a beat. She inhaled the dry soil scent, listened to the cicadas, and felt the burning heat of the Savanna sun. She was afraid. She feared that the skeptics were right. She feared she would face cold, soulless eyes or the complete absence of Amari. But amidst all those fears, a thin spark of light still burned bright. The belief that true love never truly disappears. It only hides waiting for the day to be called by name. The jeep stopped beside a large acacia tree where shadows stretched across the parched ground. From afar, a majestic figure appeared. It was a huge male lion with a golden mane burning under the sun. On his body were the scars of survival battles, the marks of a king who had truly mastered his territory. This was Amari. But Amari now was no longer the small lion cub trembling in the rain. He was a powerful beast, a true lord of the savannah. Elena stepped out of the car. This action went against all safety rules and common human logic. The surrounding space suddenly became so quiet that one could hear the wind whistling through the dry grass. The lion stopped. He stood at a distance not too far from her, his sharp amber eyes staring at the small woman standing alone in his land. Amari began to sniff the air, his large nose twitching as if trying to find a piece of memory buried under the dust of 5 years. Time seemed to stop. The people with Elena held their breath, their hands gripping the side of the car, preparing for the worst situation. A wild lion, seeing an intruder, usually roars or attacks to protect its authority. However, a miracle happened. The cold gaze of Amari suddenly changed. His tensed body gradually relaxed. The image of the proud lord suddenly disappeared, replaced by the appearance of a child finding a relative. Amari began to rush toward Elena, but that was not the pounce of a predator. He rushed forward with an intense joy that could not be restrained. That giant beast leaped up, not to tear, but to hug Elena. He rubbed his head against her neck, nuzzled her face with his large nose, and made low, gentle sounds, the very sounds Elena had not heard for half a decade. Elena burst into tears, her hands trembling as she hugged the thick mane of Amari. 5 years of separation, thousands of miles, and countless doubts of the world all vanished at this moment. This was not just a wildlife film, it was a spiritual awakening. For those who witnessed it, this moment was the most powerful answer to the question of kindness. It proved that sincere affection is a universal language, capable of piercing the shell of the fiercest instinct. Amari did not forget, and love, once planted correctly, will never be taken away by time. As the sunset slowly fell over the savannah, painting the vast horizon red, a miraculous silence enveloped the space. Amidst the dry grass, one could witness something thought to exist only in legends. A small woman and the king of beasts sitting together in absolute peace. There were no more barriers between human and beast, no more fear of sharp claws. Amari rested his head on the lap of Elena, letting her stroke his mane as if time had never passed, as if 5 years of fighting in the wild were just a long sleep before returning to the arms of a mother. This meeting brought a deep answer to the concerns about the value of kindness. We often live in a world that teaches us to be tough, to be vigilant, and always to doubt to protect ourselves. We often mistake kindness for weakness and love given without receiving as a waste. However, look at Amari. If a lion, the predator at the top of the food chain, the symbol of the harshest survival instinct, can still keep the memory of humanity for half a decade, then what great things can we humans do? The lesson from Elena and Amari is not something far away. It lies in the courage to dare to open our hearts once more. The story urges us to believe that every act of sincere love is never wasted. They are like seeds silently growing, creating invisible but strong bonds that overcome even the harshest laws of nature. Maybe an old friend is waiting for a greeting, or someone needs a kind gesture that we still hesitate to give. Remember that kindness always finds a way to return. Elena left the savannah the next day with a heart that finally found peace. She did not bring Amari home because she understood that he was truly where he belonged, amidst the free sky and the homeland grass. And in a miraculous way, Elena also found a harbor for her soul. She realized that true love is not a chain to possess, but wings so that both can freely walk on their own paths, yet always carry the image of each other in their hearts. If the story of Elena and Amari touched a small corner in your heart, please share that belief with those around you. Because amidst a world full of changes, the only thing that exists eternally is the affection we have given to each other. Thank you for listening to this story, and hope you will always find warm connections in your own journey. Under the scorching midday sun of the savannah, space seemed to melt due to heat waves rising from the arid ground. Professor Elias stood leaning against the hood of the safari vehicle, his eyes squinting because of the blinding light, but his mind was sinking into the dark patches of the past. On his sun-tanned hands, filled with calluses, he cherished a tattered photo of a lioness. That was not just a research subject, but a wild friend that he had spent his whole life protecting, before that mother fell under the brutal guns of poachers right in the middle of the day. That death left a vast void and three small souls facing a bleak future: Keto, Mia, and Ben. The three orphan lion cubs were now huddling under the meager shade next to a large tire, their innocent cloudy blue eyes looking at Elias, as if looking at the only hope. But Elias knew a painful truth. If they became more accustomed to human presence, more attached to his hands waiting for milk bottles, then the opportunity for them to become the kings of the great forest would close forever. He could not raise them like house cats, but he also could not just release them into this golden grass field to be prey for other predators. It was in the burning heat of the stalemate that a crazy plan took shape. To return freedom to them, Elias understood that he had to shed the form of a scientist. He needed a mask, a new identity that could deceive the sharp instincts of the cubs and soothe the fear inside them. Project Kindred Scent began from a silent promise under this wide high sky. Elias would become the Lion Father. He looked at the massive mascot suit occupying the entire driver's seat of the car, sweat starting to bead on his forehead. This was not just a field trip, but the beginning of a risky transformation, where Elias would have to forget the human way of walking to relearn how to live like a beast. The sound of the mascot's suit zipper rang out dryly inside the cramped vehicle cabin, marking the moment Elias cast off the identity of a university professor to step into a life-and-death theatrical game. Outside, the golden sun still poured down like honey, but inside the thick artificial fur, the world of Elias suddenly shrank through two small slits in the line eye sockets. The air became thick and sweltering. Tiny cooling systems inside the suit made weak, whirring sounds, which were nothing compared to the temperature rising with each of his breaths. Elias felt sweat begin to flow down his spine, but what worried him more than the heat was the scent. He reached out to press the button to activate the pheromone bags attached around the neck of the suit. A pungent, musky smell, mixed with the scent of damp earth and the smell of an adult male lion, began to spread. This was the result of months of extraction and testing in the laboratory, a scent passport that Elias hoped would help him pass the strict scrutiny of the keen sense of smell of the three lion cubs. He took a deep breath, suppressed the back pain caused by the cramped sitting posture, then slowly pushed the safari car door. When the door opened, a burst of bright light rushed in. Elias stepped down onto the dusty sand, his feet wrapped in padded plush layers touching the ground with an unreal feeling. He stood there, motionless, a strange creature standing on two legs, tall and unfamiliar amidst the vast green wild. From afar, under an acacia tree, the three lion cubs, Keto, Mia, and Ben, immediately jumped up. Their reaction was not joy-like when seeing Elias in his familiar khaki clothes, but high alertness. They lowered their center of gravity. Their small ears pricked up, and faint growls began to emanate from their chests. In that moment, Elias felt a primal fear creep into his heart. Would they recognize this fakery? Would a wrong movement, a step too human, shatter everything? He remembered documentary footage of how alpha lions move. Instead of walking straight, Elias hunched his back slightly, tilting his head to one side to reduce the threat of his height. He intentionally did not look directly into their eyes, an action inherently considered a challenge in the animal world. At this time, Keto, the bravest lion cub, began to cautiously approach. It tilted its small nose up into the air, trying to catch the scent molecules floating around. Elias stood still like a statue, even his breath controlled to be perfectly steady. When Keto was only a few steps away from his plush feet, it stopped and snorted loudly. It was a silent battle of wits between millions of years of predator evolution and human simulation technology. The savanna wind blew through, carrying the scent of dry grass and the artificial pheromone covering Keto. Suddenly, the lion cub relaxed its shoulders. It no longer growled. Keto took one more step, then unexpectedly rubbed its small head gently against the fake fur on the leg of Elias. It was a gentle touch, but had the weight of 1,000 pounds. Mia and Ben, seeing this, also began to approach curiously. Elias felt a surge of electricity run through his body. His heart tightened with emotion. They had accepted him under this hot and suffocating mask. Elias knew that the most difficult chapter of the project had only just begun, but at least he was granted permission to accompany them on the path to finding themselves. The following weeks on the prairie were a true physical ordeal for Elias. Life inside the mascot's suit was no longer a short experiment, but became a harsh reality. Each day, when the sun just rose, Elias had to brace himself in the thick fur, moving on all four limbs to teach the cubs how to stalk in the high grass. The joints of a man in his 50s were not designed to crawl for hours on rocks and soil, and bruises and scratches began to show clearly under the protective clothing. But that physical pain was nothing compared to the psychological war going on inside his mind. The mission of Elias was to teach Keto, Mia, and Ben how to hunt.
That is where the
more
migration
precisely,
begins.
how to become top assassins. Instead of giving them pre-cut chunks of meat, Elias was forced to use his hands wrapped in fake claws to drag a leather prey model through thorn bushes. He had to pretend to be a male lion competing for food, emitting threatening growls from the sound device in his throat to force the cubs to know how to use strength and wisdom to take the meal. There were times, seeing Mia exhausted because of hunger, her pleading eyes looking toward him, Elias almost reached into his secret pocket to take out a piece of cake or some cool water. But he stopped. A lion father would not do that. Indulgence at this time would be a death sentence for them tomorrow. One night, a sudden thunderstorm poured down on the savanna. The sound of thunder made the three lion cubs terrified. They instinctively ran to surround Elias, trying to tuck their heads into his fur to seek the protection they once received when they were orphans in the rescue center. Elias stood still in the pouring rain. Through the blurry glass of his suit, he felt the warmth and trembling of Keto nesting close to his leg. In his heart, Elias wanted to kneel down, remove this suffocating mask, and hug them tightly, comforting them that everything would be okay. But the harsh logic of a conservationist stopped him. If he let them lean on this father, they would never learn how to stand firm before nature. Elias was forced to emit a warning growl, gently but firmly pushing Keto away. That was the most heartbreaking moment. He saw the bewilderment and hurt in the eyes of the little lion. Elias had to tell himself, "I'm doing this for you." The connection between Elias and the cubs gradually transformed from pure affection into an instinctive respect. They began to learn how to observe his smallest movements. When Elias stood straight and looked into the distance, the cubs also silently observed. When he lay down to rest, they lay around like a guard unit. Elias realized that they no longer looked at him as a toy or a mobile food source. For them, this large, strange entity with the powerful scent was the embodiment of the wild laws they must follow to survive. But life never consists only of simulated lessons. When Keto began to know how to pounce on the model prey decisively, and Mia knew how to hide under the wind to avoid detection, Elias understood that his time was running out. Pressure from the project and declining health made him realize he was playing a game with death. He had taught them how to hunt, how to run, and how to hide, but he had still not taught them how to face the real enemy. And the great forest, with its inherent cruelty, did not let Elias wait for long. A real challenge, in the form of a ghost from the past, was silently approaching from the other side of the hills. The silence of a late afternoon on the prairie was suddenly torn apart by an invisible pressure. Elias, in a mascot suit that was worn out and covered in dust, suddenly noticed a strange change in the attitude of the cubs. Keto, Mia, and Ben, who were playing, suddenly froze, their ears pressed against their heads, their bodies trembling violently, then quickly retreating into the bushes behind his back. From the other side of the mound, a golden ghost appeared. That was not a model or a product of artificial intelligence. It was a real wild male lion, a giant nomad with a scorched black mane and eyes shaped like bullets. The beast stopped about 20 meters from Elias. It lowered its head, nose tilted up to catch the scent. In that moment, the heart of Elias seemed to stop beating. He knew that his artificial pheromones could fool children, but to an adult male patrolling his territory, this stranger standing on two legs was an insult and a threat that needed to be eliminated. The lion made a deep growl that shook the surrounding air, a warning signal that it was preparing to attack to wipe out the intruder and the offspring of a rival. Through the radio attached to his ear, the voice of the rescue team rose urgently. Elias, get back to the car now. We will fire anesthetic guns. Elias looked toward the bushes, where three small eyes were watching him in terror. He understood that if the safari car rushed in and the guns rang out, all his efforts to wash away the human scent over the past months would go down the drain. The children would once again believe they needed humans to survive. In a crazy but decisive moment, Elias pressed the button to block the radio. He did not run. He chose to stay. Elias took a deep breath, suppressed the pain from his trembling legs, then slowly stood as straight as possible. Under the hot mask, he let out a roar full of indignation, at the same time activating the sound device at maximum power. The soul-shredding roar echoed across the grass field, combined with the action of spreading his giant mascot arms to create an illusion of a creature larger and more powerful than any beast. Elias took one step, then two steps, stomping his feet hard on the dry ground, directly facing the death that was baring its teeth. The wild male lion froze. It had never seen a creature that smelled like its own kind, but had such a strange shape and reckless attitude. The instinct of the big cat told it that those who do not fear death are usually the most dangerous. The battle of wits took place in breathtaking silence, where there was only the sound of wind whistling through the trees. One slap from the real beast could tear the cotton fabric and end the life of Elias in an instant, but he still stood there like a bronze statue, blocking the path between the cubs and death. Finally, after moments as long as centuries, the male lion tossed its head, gave a frustrated roar, then turned its head and sauntered away into the tall grass. It chose not to gamble with this strange entity. Elias collapsed right on the spot, sweat pouring out like a stream, breath broken. But right then, he felt the small heads of Keto, Mia, and Ben nuzzling against him. They no longer looked at him as a toy or a food provider. They looked at him with the respect reserved for a king, a father who had protected his territory. Elias knew, after this confrontation, the cubs were truly ready. They had learned the most important lesson of the wild. Courage is the most powerful weapon for survival. The duration of the project finally reached the final days. The savanna sky today no longer had the cranky sun of the early days when Elias first arrived, but instead a magical purple and orange hue of twilight. Elias sat quietly inside the safari car, but this time he did not wear the mascot suit. He only wore old khaki clothes, his eyes staring through the glass at three small shadows gradually growing up in the distance. Keto, Mia, and Ben now were no longer the weak kittens of the past. They had smooth fur, firm muscles, and most importantly, sharp and wild eyes. A pride of lionesses from the north was moving across the valley. This was the opportunity that Elias had been waiting for all these months. A pride without a lead male usually easily accepts orphan cubs if they show the right instincts and submission. Elias looked at Keto, his bravest spiritual child. It stood there, nose sniffing the air, then turned its head to look at the car of Elias one last time. A moment of silence lasted. Elias wondered if in its small brain there was still any memory of the giant cotton father who protected them before death. But then Keto turned away, decisively walking toward the call of its kind. Mia and Ben also followed their brother, gradually merging into the golden flow of wild lions under the sunset. Elias stepped out of the car, his feet touching the dry ground. He slowly removed the fake lion head from his luggage bag, placing it on the hood. The mascot's suit was now torn, full of scratches and covered in road dust, the evidence for an unimaginable journey. He reached out to stroke the rough, fake fur, feeling the smell of the prairie, the smell of survival, and the smell of his own sweat after many days of effort. He realized that, in a journey to teach the children how to be lions, they themselves had taught him how to be human, a human who knows how to let go of the ego, how to love without the need for possession. Sweat flowed down his sun-darkened face. Elias took a deep breath of the air of the great forest. He felt his heart was strangely light. The pain of the past, of the pride he lost years ago, was now soothed by the new life continuing before his eyes. The lion cubs did not belong to him. They belonged to this high, wide sky, to the harsh but fair laws of nature. He stood there, alone in the golden grass field, watching the small shadows fade away until they were only tiny dots, then completely disappeared into the bright red horizon. The message of the wild is simple but profound. To save a soul, sometimes we must shed our own human form, must learn to see the world through their eyes and feel the pain with their heart. Elias smiled, a satisfied and peaceful smile. He put the lion head into the car, started the engine, and drove in the opposite direction. He went toward humans, carrying the story of a wordless love, a project that succeeded not because people remember it, but because the main characters completely forgot the person who saved their lives. The small safari car slowly rolled, leaving behind dust and lion footprints gradually being covered by wind and sand. A new generation has begun its reign, free and proud. If the story of the silent sacrifice of Professor Elias touched your heart, please help us spread this message by pressing the subscribe button and turning on notifications. Do not forget to share your feelings in the comment section so we can connect for a pristine wild world. Thank you for following. See you in the next journeys. The Serengeti Plains, after the first rains of the season, appear like a mythical painting. An entire ocean of fresh green grass stretches infinitely to the horizon, undulating with every breath of wind like emerald waves. Herds of zebras and wildebeest leisurely graze, enjoying the generosity of nature in a scene of strange tranquility. However, amidst that perfection of creation, a strange object appears, breaking the purity of green. The patrol team of Officer Musa was moving slowly in their jeep when they spotted a small black shadow lying motionless under the increasingly harsh sun. That was Keto, a lonely lion cub. In total contrast to the vibrant life of the surrounding grasslands, Keto appeared like a painful scar. His body was thin and tattered to a pitiful degree, every rib bone clearly visible behind a layer of dust-matted fur. The strangest thing did not lie in his appearance, but in what he was protecting. Amidst the lush green grass, Keto lay prostrate, his two front paws tightly clutching a crumpled, tattered black plastic bag. That artificial black color stood out in an ugly and alienated way amidst nature. As the jeep approached, instead of fleeing into the dense bushes to preserve his life as the instinct of a wild animal would dictate, Keto struggled to stand on trembling legs. The rustling sound of the plastic bag rose out of tune with the chirping of birds. His gaze was not the ferocity of a predator, but the desperate determination of a guardian watching over a final treasure. He would rather starve to death amidst this lush savanna than ever let go of that scrap of worn plastic. Musa had spent his entire life on the dusty roads of the Serengeti, but he had never seen anything so moving and incomprehensible. In order to check the health and save the life of the cub, his team was forced to use a mild sedative. When the needle touched the skin, Keto did not roar in pain. He only whimpered softly, his eyes still glued to the black plastic bag until his heavy eyelids closed. Even in a deep sleep, his claws remained clenched, digging deep into the thin plastic layer, as if it were the only thread connecting him to life. It took a great deal of effort for Musa to remove that treasure from the arms of the small lion. When the black plastic bag was placed on the hood of the Jeep, the entire patrol team held their breath. The layer of black plastic was wrinkled and faded by the Savannah sun and wind, looking like nothing more than a worthless piece of trash. But as Musa carefully opened the now brittle plastic, the secret inside made his heart tighten. There was no food, no glittering treasure, only plastic identity cards and a smartphone with a screen shattered like a spider web. Musa tremblingly picked up one card, wiping away the fine dust. The face on the card appeared clearly under the sunlight. Captain Samuel. Musa knelt down on the green grass. Samuel was not just a colleague, but also his closest friend. 3 months ago, Samuel and the entire Ranger Unit Number 7 vanished without a trace after a night when the guard station was violently attacked. In the official reports at that time, people suspected that the unit had deserted or even been bribed by illegal mining gangs. These identity cards, symbols of the honor of a forest guard, should have remained in the ashes of the station, but now they were here, protected by an orphaned lion. Musa suddenly remembered the old days, when Keto was just a tiny ball of fur saved by Samuel from the hands of poachers. In the small station amidst the great forest, Keto had grown up amidst the laughter of the Rangers. To a lion cub, the plastic ID cards dangling on the chest of Samuel or the rustling plastic bags containing supplies whenever they returned from the main town were his first toys. He had become accustomed to the smell of synthetic plastic blending with the sweat and warmth of humans. It turned out that to Keto, this black plastic bag was not trash. It was family. He believed that as long as the scent of this plastic remained, the warmth of Samuel and those soldiers had not yet vanished. For 3 long months, traveling through days of skin-scorching heat until the summer rains made the green grass grow back, Keto had made an unimaginable journey. He had protected these ID cards with all the instincts of a future king, because that was the only way he knew to keep his fathers from being forgotten amidst the vast wilderness. The truth about the missing heroes was now nestled inside that thin black plastic layer, waiting to be vindicated. When a shattered phone was brought to the technical center, a heavy atmosphere filled the room. The screen was riddled with cracks, the casing covered in the dry mud of the savannah, evidence that it had endured a brutal survival journey with Keto. After many hours of effort to restore it, the system finally restarted. A video appeared, and that was when the most cruel truth was revealed, causing everyone present to shed tears. The video began in the chaos of a stormy night. The sound of gunfire rang out continuously, drowning out the thunder. Through the shaky lens, the Ranger Unit Number 7 station was seen engulfed in smoke and fire. Amidst the streaks of bullets in the night, the face of Captain Samuel appeared, smudged with gunpowder and blood, but his eyes radiated an extraordinary resolve. He did not use his final moments to call for help for himself, but was instead hurriedly gathering the ID cards of his fallen comrades. He stuffed them all into a black plastic bag, tying it tightly to protect them from rain and road dust. In that breathless moment, Samuel looked down at Keto, who was then just a small lion cub trembling under the table. He pushed the plastic bag into the mouth of Keto and whispered in a hoarse but loving voice, "Keto, take it. Run, son. Do not let them be forgotten." That was the final order of a father and a soldier for his wild child. The video accidentally captured the faces of the attackers. They were not local poachers, but international mercenaries protecting an illegal ore mine located deep in the core of the reserve. It was these images that exposed the true face of a giant mineral corporation, the ones who had their hands in the blood of the Rangers for profit. The truth was now clear. Keto did not happen to pick up a bag of trash. He had received a sacred testament. For 3 long months, that lion cub had crossed hundreds of kilometers of the vast savanna, facing fierce hyenas and gnawing hunger. He had gone through the harshest dry season until the first rains made the savanna green again, just to fulfill his promise to Samuel. That cheap, fragile black plastic bag was the steel evidence, the voice of the deceased sent through a creature that could not speak. Everyone in the technical room fell silent as the video ended with the scene of Keto holding the bag, turning his head to run into the darkness of the savanna, while the ranger station exploded behind him. His persistence was not just instinct, but a love that transcended all species. Keto had kept the plastic from tearing, keeping the souls of the forest guards from being buried in injustice. That small lion, amidst the vast sea of green grass, was the holder of the key to justice, standing alone against the oblivion of the world. The truth from the shattered phone was like an earthquake sweeping through the entire management system of the reserve. Thanks to the images and coordinates accidentally saved in the black plastic bag, the authorities launched a large-scale raid, completely dismantling the illegal mine and arresting the perpetrators. The honor of Unit Number 7 was fully restored. Samuel and his comrades were no longer considered deserters. They were posthumously awarded the highest medals of bravery. A small monument was erected right where the guard station once stood, recording the names of the soldiers who fell to protect the green of the wilderness. However, while the human world was busy with justice and ceremonies, a different battle was taking place at the rescue center. The battle to save the life of Keto. After the plastic bag was taken away for investigation, Keto fell into a state of severe depression. The small lion refused all types of food, even the freshest pieces of meat. He only lay motionless in the corner of his enclosure, his amber eyes looking far out into the savanna, occasionally emitting whimpering, broken cries as if calling for someone in vain. The veterinarians feared that Keto would not survive, not because of physical wounds, but because he had lost his only purpose for living. Musa was the only one who understood what was happening. He knew that for Keto, the duty of protecting the bag was the final thread holding him to his deceased fathers. One afternoon, after the legal procedures were completed, Musa brought back the piece of old black plastic bag, which was now cleaned of dust but still bore the scratches of Keto, and returned it to him. As soon as he saw that crumpled piece of plastic, a bolt of energy seemed to run through the weak body of the lion. Keto struggled up, approached, and sniffed the familiar smell of plastic greenery. He growled softly, then curled up, resting his head on the black plastic scrap like a child who had finally found his familiar pillow. From that day on, Keto began to eat again, under the dedicated care of Musa and the rescue team. His thin body gradually filled out, and his previously matted fur began to regain its smooth and golden shine under the sun. In his sun-drenched room at the center, Keto often lay peacefully on the black plastic scrap, sometimes using his teeth to gently toy with the plastic stripped away he used to play with the ID card straps of Samuel. The recovery process of Keto was not just the revival of a wild creature, but also the soothing of living souls. Musa looked at Keto and saw the image of his dear friend Samuel. He understood that Keto was not just a lion. He was a living proof that love and loyalty are never limited by language or species. The lion had completed his mission of guarding the relics, and now he was being protected by the entire savanna to prepare for a new chapter, the chapter of true freedom. Time passed, and Keto was no longer the weak lion cub trembling under the baobab tree or exhausted amidst the sea of green grass. Thanks to the care of Musa and the rescue team, Keto had grown remarkably. The once spindly legs had become muscular and steady. The soft, downy fur had been replaced by a mane that was beginning to grow long, sparkling like golden threads under the African sun. However, everyone understood that a king cannot rule in a cage. Keto belonged to the savanna, the place where the ranger souls had fallen to protect. The day to release Keto arrived. Musa drove the familiar jeep, carrying the crate of Keto to the exact location where they had first found him, in the middle of a vast ocean of fresh green grass after the rainy season. The Serengeti sky that day was high and clear, a deep blue color of hope. When the cage door opened, Keto did not rush away. He stepped out slowly and majestically, his paws stepping lightly on the soft green grass carpet, as if feeling the pulse of the land where he had wandered for 3 months with the black plastic bag. Musa stood by the car, his eyes blurred with emotion. Before leaving, he performed a symbolic gesture. He tied a small black plastic strip to a nearby boundary marker. The plastic strip fluttered in the wind, creating a familiar rustling sound. Keto stopped, walked toward the plastic strip, and sniffed that scent one last time. He gently rubbed his head against the hand of Musa, a gesture of farewell full of understanding, then turned his face toward the horizon. Standing amidst the lush green savanna, Keto let out a thunderous roar. It was no longer the weak whimpering of an orphaned lion cub, but the majestic roar of a lord, echoing through the valleys, signaling the return of a legend. Keto began to run. He ran across the sea of grass, his golden mane sparkling in the deep red sunset. The image of the powerful lion disappearing into the endless green of the wilderness left in the hearts of the witnesses a fierce belief in the magical connection between humans and nature. Keto had completed his mission. He did not only protect the evidence to clear the names of Samuel and Unit Number 7, but also reminded the world that love and loyalty can exist in the harshest places, under the simplest forms like a tattered old black plastic bag. The story of Keto and the black plastic bag has become a legend told by rangers around campfires. Every time they see a black plastic strip fluttering in the savanna wind, they remember Samuel, Unit Number 7, and the young king who guarded the souls of heroes. Hopefully, this story will bring you faith in the remaining kindness in this world. Sometimes, it is the wild creatures that teach us the greatest lessons about being human. If the story of Keto touched your heart, please share it to honor the forest guards who silently sacrifice every day. Join us in spreading the message of connection and compassion by pressing the subscribe button so you do not miss the next magical journeys. Thank you for accompanying Keto until his final steps of freedom. See you in the next stories, where light always finds its way amidst the wild wilderness. The Serengeti plains appear under a burning sunrise like a golden bowl of fire. Wind whistles through the dry grass, carrying the scent of dust and a haunting silence. For Mark, a photographer who spent 10 years of his youth in Africa, this place is not just wild nature, but a sanctuary. He is in the final days of his project titled The Last Kingdom, an effort to record the final breaths of the greatest icons. Shaka is not just a lion in the eyes of Mark. He is an aged king with a legendary black mane, a creature that ruled with strength and pride. During 3 long weeks of tracking, Mark longed for a single moment. Shaka roaring in the early sunlight, a roar that could shake the entire savanna and awaken the conscience of the world. That morning, Mark broke all safety rules. He left the security vehicle and walked alone through the wilderness to reach the ancient acacia tree, where Shaka often chose his throne to catch the sun. Mark held his breath, his 400mm lens ready in his hands, his finger resting lightly on the button like a prayer. But that majestic roar never sounded. Instead, a dry metallic noise tore through the air. Thud, scrape, thud. The sound of a shovel hitting the hard, dry earth sounded as cold as a hammer hitting a coffin. Mark realized with horror that he did not come to witness a rain, but to attend a secret funeral. Mark hid behind the rough acacia trunk, his heart beating so fast he felt it might burst out of his chest. He tremblingly raised the lens, adjusting the focus to pierce through the thorny leaves. Through the clear glass, his world completely collapsed. Shaka, the king he always worshipped, was lying there. No longer heroic, no longer possessing steps that shook the ground. Now, he was just a motionless, pitiful corpse. The powerful black mane that was once the pride of the entire Serengeti was now matted with blood and red sand, looking like a discarded old rug. Mark choked back a sob in his throat, as he began to identify the people at the scene. Beside the carcass were two thin local men whom Mark recognized immediately. It was Kojo and his younger brother, the devoted guides who once shared every piece of bread with Mark during forest trips. They were silently digging a deep hole right next to Shaka, their eyes empty and soulless, like ghosts performing a sinful ritual. Each shovel, thrust into the ground, was a knife wound to the heart of Mark. But what made Mark shiver most were the three men standing around them. They did not wear the ragged clothes of poachers. They wore neat uniforms, the kind belonging to the Reserve Ranger Force. The people who swore under the flag to protect every inch of land and every life
Where's
here.
the ivory?
On their shoulders were
now,
black
or you
Alaska rifles, the barrels pointed at the villagers like a cruel threat. In that moment, a devastating truth appeared clearly in the mind of Mark. This was not a spontaneous poaching act by poor people. This was an organized murder, a link in a dark contract worth millions of dollars from international wildlife organ trafficking syndicates. Shaka did not die from the struggle for survival between animals. He died from a cowardly shot by the very people the world trusted to protect him.
Look at that.
Mark saw a soldier take out a small silver suitcase, open it, and check something inside with a sinister smile. That was the reward for processing the old king. Mark bitterly realized the ironic contrast between the majestic beauty of the African savanna and the corruption happening under the shadow of this acacia tree. Those soldiers were selling the soul of the plains for bloody dollar bills, while forcing miserable villagers to become accomplices, forced to bury the god they once revered to erase all evidence. The look through the lens of Mark now was not that of an artist seeking beauty. It was the look of a witness seeing the collapse of human morality. He realized that if he just stood still and let them fill that hole, Shaka would disappear from history as a nameless missing person, and darkness would continue to cover the Serengeti. Mark held his breath, his chest tightening as if someone was squeezing it. In the eerie silence of dawn, even the smallest sound could become a death sentence. He knew the laws of this land well. In the wild savanna, when the guns belong to the wicked, human life is sometimes cheaper than a horn or an animal skin. Just one wrong step, one snapping dry branch, and Mark would no longer be the storyteller, but the next one lying in that deep pit with Shaka. Standing behind the ancient acacia tree, Mark looked down at the camera in his hand. This was the most modern equipment, capable of catching the smallest vibrations of light. But right now, it was as heavy as a block of lead. He stood before a cruel boundary. If he retreated in silence, he would live. He could return to his family, continue his illustrious photography career, and forget this horrific scene like a nightmare. But if he pressed the shutter, the mechanical sound, even if minimized to the limit, could still echo across the open space, betraying his position instantly. Mark looked back at Shaka through the lens. The king of the plains lay there, insulted by indifferent shovels and the triumphant smiles of traitors. A simmering anger began to rise within him, burning away his initial fear. He remembered 10 years of attachment to this land, the long nights staying awake just to protect a bird nest or track a herd of elephants. He could not let Shaka, the symbol of pride and freedom, be discarded like a faulty item, erased from this world without anyone knowing. If not me, then who? If not now, then when? That question swirled deep in the mind of Mark. He realized that the mission of a photographer is not only to record beauty, but also to expose the most brutal truths, even when that truth might take their life. Mark began to act with high concentration. The hands that usually shook with age suddenly became incredibly steady. He gently adjusted the settings, increasing the ISO to compensate for the low light, widening the aperture to focus on the face of the commander holding the silver suitcase, living proof of corruption. He held his breath, his heart skipping a beat to keep his body completely still. Click! That tiny sound felt like a thunderous explosion to Mark. He saw through the lens that the nearest commander suddenly froze. He was no longer laughing. The ears of a man who had experienced hundreds of hunts had caught a strange frequency that did not belong to nature. He spun around, his sharp gaze scanning the bushes where Mark was hiding. Who
Get
is
out
there?
here now!
He roared,
I know
his
you're in
voice
there. Come
hoarse
out, or I'll
and
burn
full
this whole
of
place
murderous
down.
intent. Immediately, the black, cold AK rifle barrel pointed straight at the ancient acacia tree. Mark felt the cold breath of death approaching, but in his hand, the camera had captured the most precious evidence. He was no longer afraid. Instead, there was a strange serenity. The truth had been recorded. Mark knew there was no way back. When the AK rifle was locked on his position, any hiding would only make it easier for the enemy to pull the trigger. He took a deep breath, calmly stepped out from behind the old acacia tree, both hands raised high above his head. In his right hand, he still gripped the camera, the only physical evidence of the crime that just occurred. The grave diggers stopped their work. Kojo looked at him with eyes of horror, a silent plea clear on the wrinkled face of the old guide. "What did you see?" The commander approached, his voice hissing through his teeth like a cobra. He did not wait for Mark to answer, grabbed the camera from his neck, and threw it hard against a nearby rock. A sharp cracking sound rang out. The camera, worth tens of thousands of dollars, the companion of Mark across many Savanna miles, was now shattered into pieces of plastic and glass. He sneered, using his boot to crush the lens. "Do you think a photo can save this animal? Here, the sand will swallow everything, including you." Mark looked at the wreckage of the camera, then looked directly into the eyes of the commander. He did not flinch, his voice hardening. "A photo might not save Shaka, but it will ensure you never sleep peacefully under this sun again." The commander signaled his subordinates to tie Mark up. In that moment of chaos and tension, a miracle happened that the gunman did not notice. Mark, with the experience of someone living on the edge of danger, had secretly pressed the memory card release button just before the camera was snatched away. He skillfully let the tiny card fall into the red sand right under his feet. At that moment, Kojo, the former guide of Mark, stepped forward to continue digging the hole as ordered by the soldiers. He had seen the entire action of Mark. When the soldier turned his back to get more rope, Kojo did a brave thing. Instead of shoveling dirt into the pit, he used a shovel to secretly push a thick layer of soil, completely burying the tiny memory card right where the foot of Mark had stood. A fleeting look between Mark and Kojo established a wordless contract. The truth would be protected by the oppressed. The following months were a series of nightmares for Mark in the rebel camp. But faith in the memory card under the Serengeti sand helped him survive. 6 months later, thanks to pressure from international organizations and a rescue by a special task force, Mark returned to that place. He found Kojo, and under the ancient acacia tree, they dug up the most powerful weapon in the world. A shocking international trial took place. The photo titled Silent Evidence appeared on the large screen of the court, exposing the faces of the traitors and the pitiful body of Shaka. It was not just a photo, it was an undeniable indictment by light. The corrupt soldiers were handcuffed one by one under the witness of the whole world. Justice was finally served, not by bullets, but by the courage of a man with a camera and the remaining honesty of a villager. The afternoon sunlight of the Serengeti once again dyed the vast plains red, but this time it did not carry the shade of death. 6 months since that fateful day, Mark stood again under the ancient acacia tree. He no longer wore the multi-pocketed vest of a photographer, nor did he carry a bulky lens kit worth a fortune. Instead, he wore the grass-colored uniform of the Volunteer Ranger Force. On his shoulder was a rifle, not for hunting, but to ensure that no illegal gunshot would ever be allowed to ring out on this land again. Mark slowly approached an unmarked grave, just a small mound of stones surrounded by dry thorn branches to keep scavengers away. That was where Shaka rested. He placed his hand on the hot stone under the sun, feeling the warmth of the savanna spread into his palm. A trial had ended. The culprits were behind bars. But for Mark, the true victory did not lie in the sentences. It lay in the awakening of his own soul. I spent my whole life photographing beauty, but I never truly protected it, Mark thought to himself. He realized a harsh but true thing. To protect life, sometimes one must step out of the position of a safe observer to become a warrior on the front line. A camera can tell the story, But the presence of a protector is what prevents the next tragedy from happening. Beside him, Kojo, the guide from years ago, had also become part of the community patrol team. Kojo smiled, a gentle smile replacing his former fear. The sacrifice of Mark and the brave action of Kojo had created a powerful wave of change. Now, villagers were no longer forced to be silent before evil. They had become the eyes and ears of the savannah, because they understood that when nature dies, their souls and source of life wither too. Under the small stone marker, Mark personally carved a line in Swahili and English. The truth may be buried under black sand, but the light from it will burn the evildoers. That was not just a tribute to Shaka, but a reminder to anyone intending to violate this green sanctuary. As the sun slowly hid behind the distant hills, from the tall grass, a small figure appeared. It was a lion cub, perhaps a descendant of Shaka, looking at the world with clear golden eyes. It gave a small, immature roar and then ran into the darkness of the wilderness. Mark smiled, a peaceful smile he had never had in 10 years of holding camera. The story of Shaka and silent evidence has become a new legend of the Serengeti, reminding us that faith and the connection between people, when placed in the right spot, can heal even the deepest wounds of nature. We do not need to be great heroes to change the world. We just need to be brave enough not to stay silent before evil. The journey to protect the core values of nature is still very long, and each of your companionships is the greatest motivation. If the story of Mark and Shaka touched your heart, do not forget to press the subscribe button and turn on notifications. Each of your subscriptions not only helps the channel grow, but is also a commitment that we will listen, spread, and protect the truths that need to be voiced. See you in the next films. Under the harsh sun of the Kenyan savannah, the air seemed to thicken, shimmering through heat waves rising from the cracked earth. The steady thud of boots on the parched ground was the only sound breaking the silence of the wilderness. Kofi stopped, his calloused and rough hands slowly lifting a rusted steel trap from the thick dust. In this wild place, silence has never been harmless. Kofi's inner voice echoed like a contemplative monologue. It is a warning, a sigh from Mother Earth before the storm. He cautiously brushed away the soil, clinging to the sharp serrated teeth, the deadly metal that had claimed the lives of so many creatures. At that moment, sunlight shone into his palm, revealing a long, stark white scar running from below the thumb to the wrist. Kofi shuddered slightly. It was not a shudder of physical pain, but because a vivid memory of a rainy day many years ago was rushing back. He looked toward the horizon, where the great rift valley met the deep blue sky. In those eyes, there was no hatred for the poachers, only a rock-solid determination, the quiet faith of a solitary guard. Right then, the radio on his hip crackled, shattering the atmosphere. Kofi, there is movement in the core zone. A group of 3, armed. They are heading toward the rhino herd. Kofi did not hesitate for a second. He put the trap in his bag, adjusted the brim of his wide hat, and plunged into the thorny bushes. He knew this fight was not just to protect the animals, but to protect the final line of decency. Kofi entered the thorny acacia bushes with the silence of a ghost. On this step, survival is not for the loud. He did not run, but moved at a steady pace, his eyes scanning every millimeter of the ground. To a seasoned ranger like him, every broken branch, every faint footprint on the sand, or the sudden flight of a woodpecker told a story about who had just passed by. Poaching is not just a crime. Kofi thought as he squeezed through a narrow, rocky crevice. It is a betrayal of the land that fed our ancestors. He stopped, kneeling beside a crushed patch of grass that still held the faint burnt smell of kerosene, the characteristic sin of those using modern weapons. They were very close. Solitude began to invade the space. Amidst the vast wilderness, humans become so small. Kofi understood that help was at least an hour away by helicopter, but if he stopped, the lead rhinos ahead would not have another chance to see the sun set. He tightened the strap of the rifle on his shoulder sweat pouring down his forehead and stinging his eyes. Kofi moved deeper into the core zone, where the canopy grew denser and shadows began to dance as sunlight filtered through the leaves. He followed a small trail that animals often use to find water holes. Suddenly, instinct told him something was wrong. The silence now was too absolute. No insect sounds, no breeze. Kofi froze, hand on a gun stock, but it was too late. From the dense foliage above, a figure collapsed down. It was a perfect ambush calculated in advance. Juma, a poacher with a giant physique, had been waiting for him on a high branch. Kofi managed to pivot to avoid a direct punch, but the second man, Haka, appeared from behind. A dry thud sounded as the butt of an AK-47 slammed directly into the back of Kofi's neck. The world before his eyes spun. The yellow of the grass, the green of the leaves, and the red of the sunset blurred into a chaotic vortex. Kofi fell, his face pressed against the burning sand. He tried to get up, his trembling hands reaching forward as if to grasp a final ray of hope. But a heavy boot stepped hard on his back, plunging him into the darkness of unconsciousness. In the final moments before completely losing consciousness, the only thing Kofi felt was the saltiness of blood and the heat radiating from the ground. He had fallen into the hands of those who knew no compassion. The hunt had ended, and now, the Guardian had become the trapped prey. Kofi woke up when a scoop of muddy, salty water doused his face. He coughed violently, the taste of blood in his mouth mixing with dust making his throat parched. As his vision cleared, he realized he was kneeling on the scorching savanna ground, his hands tied tightly behind his neck with rough rope. In front of him, Juma was brandishing a gun, while Paka, the one with the coldest eyes, was leisurely fiddling with the rusted steel trap he had just taken from Kofi's bag. "You've been tailing us for too long, Kofi," Paka said, his voice raspy and full of mockery. "You Rangers think you're saints, but here, only we set the rules." He held the steel trap high, the jagged teeth reflecting the afternoon sun threateningly. He did not want to kill him quickly. He wanted to use this very tool of conservation to torture and intimidate anyone who dared stand in their way. In the moment of facing death, the instinct of a son of the steppe made Kofi unusually calm. Instead of looking at the gun barrel, his eyes were instinctively drawn to a patch of tall grass about 15 meters away. Among the mottled shadows of the acacia trees, something was moving. Two golden spots, deep and majestic, were watching the scene motionlessly. It was Asani. The massive alpha lion appeared like a ghost of the wilderness. It did not roar, did not growl, just stood there in a ready-to-pounce stance. Kofi's heart pounded in his chest. He recognized this animal. He recognized the thick black mane and especially the way it slightly tilted its head when observing, a habit it had since it was a weak cub. The tension now became so suffocating that the wind whistling through the dry branches could be heard. To the poachers, the presence of a lion in the shadows seemed unnoticed because they were too excited by the power game over Kofi's body. But for a viewer, this was a shivering feeling. Would Asani appear as the final judge to end everyone? Or was he waiting for something from the kneeling man? Haka stepped forward, placing the cold gun barrel against Kofi's temple. "Say goodbye to your animals," he sneered. Kofi closed his eyes, but his mouth moved slightly. He was not begging the poachers. He was emitting a series of low sounds, a short and steady whistle like the heartbeat of the savannah. It was a secret language between him and the wild world, a signal that only souls who had once touched each other could understand. In the shadow of the bushes, Asani's ears twitched. His whiskers vibrated. He smelled the steel of a trap, the scent that had once dug deep into his flesh years ago. Hatred and memory merged in the golden eyes, turning him into a storm waiting for the day to explode. The line between life and death now was as thin as a hair under the afternoon sun. The moment Paka lightly squeezed his finger on the trigger, the world around Kofi seemed to slow down. He no longer heard the mocking laughter of the poachers, only the rapid thudding in his chest. Taking advantage of the moment, Haka was absorbed in the feeling of absolute power. Kofi's bound hands worked silently. With an extraordinary calmness, his fingers searched the secret fold of his collar, where a tiny SOS signaling device was hidden. He held down the button with all his final faith. A very slight vibration responded against his skin. The GPS signal, along with precise coordinates, was launched into space, heading toward the command center. Finished yet? Juma snapped, gesturing toward Kofi. Finish him off so we can go get the rhino horns. Haka sneered, raising the steel trap high, intending to perform the final cruel act. A dry clanging sound of metal colliding rang out. That very sound became the detonator for an earthquake from the wilderness. From the bushes, a roar erupted, tearing through the silent air, shaking the very ground beneath the poacher's feet. Asani was no longer an observing ghost. He lunged out like a golden arrow, cutting through the wind. But his target was not the kneeling man. The giant lion aimed straight at the one standing highest, and holding a weapon, Juma. The powerful pounce sent Juma flying, the AK-47 discharging accidentally, bullets flying wildly and plowing up the dry earth. As Asani leapt into the air, the afternoon sun shone directly on the long, rugged scar on his left leg. That scar was as clear as a testament to the past, a strange symbolic similarity to the scar on Kofi's hand. Two marks, one pain, now appearing together to execute a sentence of justice. Haka was terrified. He dropped the steel trap, hurriedly drawing the handgun hidden behind his belt to shoot Asani in the head to save his accomplice. But Kofi did not let that happen. With a superhuman effort, he used the full strength of his legs, throwing himself like a boulder to ram hard into Haka's hip. Both tumbled into the thorn bushes. The struggle took place in dust and screams. Asani's roar mixed with Haka's cursing and the Savanna wind whistling fiercely. Kofi rolled on the ground, trying to use his body as a shield, making it difficult for Haka as he tried to find a shooting angle toward the lion. He accepted the danger, accepted the thorns tearing his flesh, just to protect the being that had revealed itself for him. Under the intense afternoon sun, blood and sweat blended, creating a tragic and heroic picture of survival, where the hunter was now paying the price under the claws of nature. The sound of the Bell 206 helicopter from the distant horizon was initially just a small buzz, but very quickly it became a roaring volume, drowning out the wailing wind of the steppe. Kofi's SOS signal had guided the rapid response team to the exact coordinates in record time. Powerful beams of light from the helicopter's searchlights swept down on the scene like swords of light, blinding the remaining poacher. Haka, currently struggling with Kofi in the thorns, was completely paralyzed by the overwhelming force of the reinforcements. Special forces rappelled down lightning fast, weapons in hand locking down every escape route for the criminals. The moment the troops swarmed in, Asani froze. He released the trembling Juma, golden eyes looking toward the giant iron birds roaring in the sky. Wild instinct urged him to retreat, but he did not run immediately. He turned his head, looking directly at Kofi. By this time, Kofi had been freed from his bonds by his teammates. He stood up, breath still ragged, blood from the gash on his forehead trickling down his cheek, but his eyes were only for the Lord before him. Amidst the brilliant searchlights and swirling dust, a miraculous moment of silence appeared. Asani stood there, majestic and solemn. As he took a slow step toward the darkness of the tall grass, the helicopter light shone directly on his left leg. The rugged, old scar appeared vividly. Kofi instinctively raised his right hand, where the white scar ran from the palm to the wrist. Those two marks looked at each other in silence. A mark from human mercy, and a mark from the gratitude of a beast. Kofi sat down on the ground as the medical team approached. He refused to lie on the stretcher immediately. He picked up the rusted steel trap lying abandoned on the sand, the tool that had sparked it all. He touched the cold, serrated teeth, then looked in the direction Asani had just disappeared. He whispered softly, his voice trembling but full of happiness. We saved each other again, old friend. The story ends as the sunset gradually fades, giving way to the starry night sky of Africa. Patrol vehicles began to escort the poachers away, returning the inherent peace to the savannah. Kofi looked into the distance, where the tall grass rustled in the night wind. He knew that out there, Asani was still walking on his territory, free and proud. Nature never forgets a favor. The final commentary echoed, gentle as a prayer. It has no ledgers to record, but it has a heart to remember. When we protect a living being, we are actually protecting the most decent part remaining in our own souls. Mercy is the most enduring bond, a thin green line that can never be broken. The clicking sound of the lens cap snapping shut echoed sharply in the silence of the savannah, sounding like the gavel of a judge announcing the end of a career. David sighed, wiping a streak of sweat mixed with dust from his forehead. Around him, the Serengeti plains appeared under the intense midday sun, where the air was heated to the point of trembling, turning every landscape on the horizon into a blurred mess like a melting oil painting. David looked down at his hands, then at the expensive equipment neatly packed on the bench of the open-top Jeep. For 10 years, he had hunted the most glorious moments of nature, but now, everything was just soulless numbers on a memory card. He felt exhausted. The cruelty of nature, where death is natural and survival is a ruthless war, had gradually eroded his faith. He wondered what the point of capturing the beauty of the wild was when he was just an outsider, helplessly watching creatures fall under the harsh laws of life. This would be the last time, David told himself. He intended to start the engine, leave this reserve, and never return as a photographer again. The world did not lack beautiful photos, and he no longer had enough vitality to continue being a ghost behind the lens. But just as his hand touched the steering wheel, a dark yellow figure stumbled out from the acacia bushes ahead, completely changing his destiny. The silence of the afternoon suddenly became heavy as that figure approached. It was Nala. David recognized her immediately by the distinctive V-shaped scar on her left ear, one of the proudest lionesses of this land. But the Nala he was seeing was no longer the figure of a predator at the top of the food chain. She walked unsteadily, her hind legs severely injured, blood soaking a patch of dark yellow fur, leaving long streaks on the dusty ground. However, what made David's heart tighten was not her wound, but what she was carrying. Nala was clutching the scruff of a lion cub. The little one was only a few months old, tiny, weak, and seemingly too tired to cry out. In the wild, an injured lioness carrying a cub is the easiest target for any enemy. Usually, instinct would drive them to hide in the densest thickets, but Nala seemed to have made the most desperate and crazy decision of her life. Instead of avoiding the Jeep, the object she had always kept a safe distance from, Nala walked straight toward David. Her heavy panting blended with the smell of blood and road dust. She stopped right next to the wide-open car door. David held his breath, his body stiff with fear and amazement. In a moment that broke every rule of nature, Nala reached up and gently placed the child on the floor of the vehicle, right next to David's dust-covered boots. Nala stepped back a pace, gasping for air, then looked up at David. It was not the usual threatening growl. It was a pair of bright golden eyes containing a deep entrustment, a silent plea. I can no longer protect it. Please keep it. David felt the warmth and trembling from the lion cub as it tried to huddle against his leg for protection. A tiny creature, so fragile that even a slight impact could break it, was now lying within his reach. But that sacred moment was torn apart by a wild, piercing laugh from afar. A cloud of dust rose under the harsh sun. A pack of 6 hyenas had caught up. They lined up, their slanted eyes and sharp teeth bared under the scorching heat. They knew Nala was exhausted. They knew the delicious prey was right there. The hyenas began to spread out, forming a pincer movement to surround the Jeep and the collapsing lioness. Nala used her last bit of strength to turn around, standing as a barrier between the hyenas and the car door where David sat. She gave a low growl, a sound no longer powerful but full of rage, ready to die to protect her child who was now in the hands of a stranger. David looked down at the cub, then at the approaching hyenas. He realized he was no longer a photographer standing outside the game. He had officially been pulled into this war for survival. The tension now could be felt clearly through every fiber of muscle. David sat motionless in the driver's seat, his hands gripping the steering wheel so hard his knuckles turned white. Beneath his feet, the lion cub began to make small, trembling cries, trying to huddle deeper into the space between his boots and the gas pedal. Right outside the door, separated only by a thin layer of metal, Nala was panting heavily. She collapsed beside the wheel, her head still held high toward the enemy, her eyes tired but unyielding. She had become a living shield in the truest sense, ready to sacrifice her life to protect the child entrusted to the vehicle. The hyena pack began to close the circle. Under the clear daylight, the cruelty appeared without cover. David clearly saw the jagged bite marks on Nala's back, the torn patches of skin, and the extreme aggression of the alpha hyena, a large female with a torn ear. She was growling, stepping closer inch by inch, her slanted eyes never leaving the position of the cub. An old moral code suddenly returned to David's mind. Do not interfere with nature. Let everything happen according to its rules. He looked down at the expensive white lens Canon camera lying on the passenger seat. The instinct of a photographer with 10 years of experience urged him to pick it up. This is the photo of a lifetime,
The shot
a
of a
voice in his
lifetime.
head whispered. The perfect cruelty of the savannah. This photo will amaze the whole world. He reached out to touch the cold body of the camera, his index finger resting on the shutter button. But when he looked through the viewfinder, what he saw was not a photography subject, but a dying mother and a frightened child. In that moment, David found himself ridiculous. He had spent a decade recording the pain of this world without once reaching out to soothe it. He realized that the professional indifference he was once proud of was actually just a mask to cover cowardice. The lion cub lightly scratched his leg, and that touch was like an electric current running straight to his heart, awakening the human part that had been sleeping behind soulless lenses. Enough, David whispered. He decisively pushed the camera aside, letting it roll among the dust on the floor. He did not want to be a ghost behind a lens anymore. He looked at Nala, the animal sacrificing her life because of her faith in a stranger. The initial panic disappeared, replaced by a powerful surge of adrenaline flowing down his spine. He reached behind, grabbing the heavy metal monopod. It was not a weapon, but in his hand right now, it was the embodiment of resistance. David stood straight up in the driver's seat, looking directly at the alpha hyena. He had made his choice. He would not photograph death. He would protect life. The alpha hyena, with her muscular body and battle scars, seemed to have lost patience. She understood that the mother lion was completely depleted. With a characteristic wild laugh, she took a leap forward, aiming for Nala's throat to end it all. But she was wrong. She had not accounted for the only variable in this hunt, the human inside the iron monster. David no longer sat still. He stood up on the driver's seat, reaching high above the roof of the Jeep, turning himself into a giant black shadow dominating under the sun. Back off, he roared, a coarse and authoritative sound no less than a male lion protecting his territory. At the same time, he used the metal monopod to strike the side of the Jeep repeatedly. The clang, clang, clang sounds echoed across the plains, tearing through the hot air. The hyena pack froze for a moment, surprise evident in their slanted eyes. But the hunger and hunting instinct were too great. Two other hyenas began to slip past the side of the car to find a way to reach the cub. David quickly reached into the cabin and pressed the car horn firmly. The horn blared continuously, a harsh artificial sound that wild creatures had never heard at such a close distance. He turned the key, started the engine, and stepped hard on the gas. The Jeep shook violently, the diesel engine roaring, emitting thick black clouds of pungent smoke directly into the faces of the predators. However, the alpha hyena still growled, crouching down to prepare for a decisive jump into the vehicle. David suddenly remembered the high-power flash attached to the camera. In photography, this is a tool to create beautiful light, but in this fight, it was a blinding weapon. He grabbed the device, switching to manual flash mode at maximum intensity. Flash, flash, flash. Extremely powerful bursts of white light erupted continuously. Even under the daylight, they created terrible blind spots. The alpha hyena let out a painful howl as her sensitive eyes were torn apart by the hallucinating light. She stumbled back, shaking her head repeatedly to regain her vision. Seizing the opportunity, David both banged on the car and shouted loudly, creating an unprecedented scene of chaos. The combination of the engine roar, the piercing horn, the black smoke, and the continuous flash pulses created a true monster in the eyes of the hyenas. The persistence of the pack began to crack. They realized that attacking this vehicle required a price too high that they were not willing to pay. The leader backed away, letting out a frustrated call to the pack. One by one, they began to scatter, retreating into the dense acacia bushes, but still looking back with regret. David did not stop. He continued to run the engine and flash the lights until he was sure those gray shadows had vanished behind the red dust. He collapsed into the driver's seat, his chest heaving, sweat pouring down his neck. He looked down at his feet. The cub had stopped trembling. It looked up at him with round, clear eyes, a look that no lens in the world could ever fully capture the gratitude of. Silence gradually returned to the plains, but this time it no longer felt like death. David hurriedly reached for the radio, his hands still shaking from the aftershocks of adrenaline. He contacted the reserve patrol, reporting the coordinates and Nala's emergency situation. When the distant sound of the rescue team's engine arrived, David knew his intervention had truly mattered. Nala, as if understanding that the danger had passed and true friends were coming, began to move. She used her last bit of strength to stand up on 3 legs, her body thin but still exuding the majesty of a queen. She let out a soft, low growl, the call for her child. The cub huddled against David's leg one last time, as if to memorize the scent of its protector, then clumsily hopped down to the floor. David watched that small figure run toward its mother, where Nala bowed down to lick the cub's fur as a comfort after the nightmare. Right before entering the brush to receive support from the rescue team, Nala suddenly stopped. She turned her head, looking straight at David, sitting in the car. In that moment, time seemed to freeze. It was no longer the distance between a photographer and a wild beast, but a connection between 2 souls who had walked across the line of life and death together. A look that pierced the soul, containing respect and a silent thank you that no words could describe. Then she disappeared into the golden tall grass, carrying the hope of a new generation. The patrol arrived shortly after to tend to Nala's wounds. David sat back in the cabin, looking down at the floor where a few strands of the cub's fur still remained. He picked up the camera, this time not with boredom, but with a strange sense of appreciation. He understood that this lens would from now on carry a different mission. It was no longer a tool for him to stand outside. It was a weapon for him to tell stories about life, to call on the world, to protect the creatures he had just redeemed. David started the car, heading toward the horizon where the sun was beginning to soften. He was not retiring anymore. He realized that the world did not need more soulless, beautiful photos. It needed people ready to stand up and protect that beauty with all their hearts. The old journey had ended, but a new mission, the mission of a true protector, had just begun. We often think we are just small observers before the cruelty of the world. But like David, sometimes all we need to do is put the camera down and reach out our hand. An act of kindness not only saves a life, but also redeems our own soul. If this story touched you, please share it to spread faith in the miraculous connection between humans and nature. Thank you for accompanying us on this journey to find the light again. The Serengeti savanna appeared like an endless stretch of lush green silk under a crystal clear sky. It was a scorching afternoon, But the heat was not dry. It carried the rich moisture of the earth after the first rains of the season. Amidst the grass bushes taller than a person, nature seemed to be singing a love song about fertility. However, behind that radiant beauty, a quiet drama of survival was unfolding on the banks of a full river, where the muddy, rushing current told secrets of the heart of the earth. Right at the edge of the water, in a small hollow eroded by the waves into the reddish-brown soil, Keto lay motionless. The lion cub with the golden fur was now stained with streaks of damp mud. Keto was exhausted. The sweltering midday heat made him gasp for breath, his amber eyes gazing listlessly at the flowing water right in front of him. For a lion cub, the river was not just a source of water, but also a boundary full of danger. His mother had left to conduct an important hunt in the nearby dense forest, leaving Keto with a supreme command: hide and remain absolutely silent. Keto tried to press himself tightly against the damp dirt wall, hoping the brown color of the earth and the green grass hanging from above would protect him. He did not know that, in the wild world, the green of life was also the color of treachery. On the high slope, right behind him, the green grass began to move unusually. A foul smell, characteristic of a scavenger, was drifting across the water with the wind. An experienced predator had caught the scent of innocence, and it was quietly observing from above, waiting for the moment to strike a fatal blow. The figure that appeared on the ridge was not a majestic warrior, but it was one of the most fearsome predators of the savannah, an old female hyena. She did not have a polished appearance. Her spotted fur was ragged, full of scars from previous fights over carcasses, and one ear was missing a large chunk. Yet, her eyes, a dull yellow light full of cunning, radiated a ruthless focus. She stood there, amidst the thick green grass, her black nose constantly sniffing the humid air. She had smelled the scent of milk, the scent of downy fur, and the scent of fear emanating from below the slope. The hyena was in no hurry. She was a master of patience. To her, Keto was not a lion, the future king of this land, but simply a soft, succulent, and defenseless piece of prey. She bared her teeth slightly, revealing powerful jaws that could crush elephant bones, and emitted a tiny laugh, a vibration in her throat that would make any creature shiver. She began to move, each footstep so light that not a single blade of grass broke, weaving through the bushes to head toward the edge of the cliff right above Keto's head. Under the hollow, Keto began to feel a change in the air. A pungent, fishy stench began to overpower the scent of sweet grass. The lion cub cringed, his small legs trembling as he tried to cling to the damp, red earth. He looked up. From his perspective, the shadow of the hyena stretched long down the dirt wall, covering his tiny body like a funeral shroud. Keto knew he had been discovered. Instinct urged him to run, but to his side was the rushing river full of crocodiles, and behind him was the sheer dirt wall. He was trapped between two deaths. The gaze of the hyena finally locked onto the target, seeing the round head and tiny ears of Keto shivering in the hollow. The hyena could not hide her excitement. She began to find a way down. She slid lightly down the slope, her sharp claws digging into the ground, creating deadly crunching sounds. Every centimeter the hyena moved closer was a second shorter for Keto's life. The lion cub tried to let out a small growl to defend himself, but all that came out was a weak, lost cry in the vast space. At this point, the hyena was halfway down the slope. She paused for a beat, preparing for the final leap to end Keto's life. In that moment, Keto's world seemed to shrink down to just the gaping, drooling mouth of the enemy. He closed his eyes, tucked his head between his front legs, and waited for the pain to arrive. But just as death seemed imminent, another sound, deep, heavy, and carrying the power of an earthquake, suddenly rang out from the river, shaking the ground beneath them. Just as the hyena took her stance to leap for the kill, the river behind Keto changed abruptly. A giant black mass, which had been motionless like a forgotten rock in the current, began to rise. It was Nku, a huge male hippo with a massive size and a hot temper famous throughout this stretch of the river. Throughout the afternoon, Nku had been soaking in the cool water to escape the sun, leaving only his eyes and small nostrils above the surface. But the crunching of soil falling from the slope and the scratching of the hyena had disturbed the sleep of the giant. Nku was not a hero in a fairy tale. He was an extreme territorial protector. To him, the appearance of anyone, whether lion or hyena, right next to his resting place was an insult. With explosive power, Nku stood straight up. Tons of rippling muscle pushed the water, splashing everywhere, creating small waves that crashed against the bank where Keto was taking refuge. The lion cub started, drenched by the water, looking up in bewilderment at the towering creature that had risen right next to him. The hyena froze at the edge of the slope, her forelegs shaking from momentum. She looked down and realized she was no longer facing a weak lion cub, but one of the most dangerous animals in Africa. Nku snorted a powerful blast of water vapor through his nostrils, the angry huffing sound echoing like the relief valve of a giant pressure cooker. He slowly dragged his massive body onto the shore, mud clinging to his thick gray skin. Each of his footsteps sank deep into the red earth, creating tremors that made the hyena retreat in terror. The confrontation had now shifted to a completely different extreme. The female hyena hissed, trying to maintain her position, but Nku did not give her that chance. The hippo opened his huge mouth to an angle of nearly 180 degrees. It was a terrifying sight. Long, sharp tusks like ivory swords, jagged and threatening. A thunderous roar erupted from deep within Nku's throat. A low sound, carrying the power of lightning, shaking even the green grass leaves high above. Nku's message was very clear. Get out of here, immediately. Keto lay stuck between the two giants. He felt the heat from the hippo's breath and the foul stench from the hyena. In that moment, the power of the savannah belonged to the one with absolute physical strength. Nku the hippo stomped his feet hard on the mud, his eyes bloodshot, staring straight at the hyena, ready to crush anything in his path. His appearance was not out of compassion for the lion cub, but an assertion of the absolute sovereignty of an uncrowned king of the river. Faced with the overwhelming power and the erupting rage of Nku, the female hyena realized that this hunt had ended sooner than she planned. The survival instinct rose stronger than hunger. Hyenas are cunning opportunists. They know exactly when to attack and when to step back to preserve their lives. A hippo's bite could easily break the spine of any predator. The hyena let out a low whimper, her body shrinking, her ears pressed flat against her head. She began to retreat in a chaotic manner, her back legs tripping over tree roots on the dirt wall. No longer possessing her initial look of triumph, she turned and ran for her life into the tall green grass, vanishing like a ghost chased away by sunlight. When the enemy had gone far away, silence enveloped the riverbank, leaving only the heavy snorting of Nku and the sound of water gently lapping against the shore. Nku stood there like a guardian deity made of stone, his giant shadow completely covering Keto's tiny body. The lion cub remained motionless, his amber eyes looking up at the giant standing right beside him. The distance between the two creatures was only a few handspans. Keto felt the heat radiating from the thick skin of the hippo and the pungent smell of mud. His heart beat wildly, not knowing if his cranky neighbor would consider him the next target. Nku lowered his massive head, so close that Keto could see the stiff hairs on his muzzle and the old scars on his gray skin. The hippo looked straight at the tiny creature trembling at his feet. In that moment, there seemed to be a silent intersection between two animals that were never friends. Nku did not see in Keto a territorial threat, nor did he see a food competitor. He only saw a young soul being left behind in a harsh life. The giant snorted loudly through his nose, blowing away the dust particles clinging to Keto's fur like a final warning about not disturbing my sleep ever again. Yet, that action carried a strange sense of gentleness. Nku did not unleash another stomp or roar. He slowly turned his massive body back toward the muddy river. with slow but steady steps. He waded into the water, bit by bit letting his body sink deep into the cool current, until only his eyes and ears remained above. Keto lay in the shade that Ku had just left behind, a shadow that seemed to still hold warmth and protection. The lion cub began to relax his muscles, his breathing gradually becoming more regular. He realized that he had just escaped the clutches of death thanks to a creature his mother had taught him to stay away from. The savannah is full of harsh rules, but sometimes survival comes from a completely random and miraculous intervention like that. Keto lay still, listening to the flowing water and waiting. But this time, fear had given way to a silent belief that Mother would return soon. As the harsh midday sun began to soften, turning into the honey gold tones of a late afternoon, the savannah also seemed to become more peaceful. Keto still lay there, nestled under the red dirt wall, but his mindset was no longer that of a prey waiting to die. He quietly observed the river, where Mku, the giant who had just saved his life, was now only 2 small ripples on the water. The silence at this time was no longer scary. It was the peace after the storm. Suddenly, from afar, beyond the lush green bushes, a deep and powerful sound rang out. It was the call Keto had been waiting for all day long, the low roar of the mother lion. Soon after, her majestic figure appeared on the ridge, where the hyena had stood just minutes before. The mother lion did not come alone. She carried the scent of success from the hunt, but her eyes were filled with anxiety. When she saw the tiny figure of her son still safe in the hollow, her steps turned from cautious to hurried. She rushed down the slope, dust swirling under her powerful paws. Keto jumped up, his small legs no longer trembling, but becoming extraordinarily agile. He ran into his mother's arms, nuzzling his head into her smooth and warm fur. The mother lion licked Keto's body all over, checking every scratch, every breath of her child. She sniffed the strange scent remaining on Keto's fur, the stench of the hyena and the pungent mud of the hippo. She looked down at the river, where Mku had just slightly moved his ears. With the instinct of an expert hunter, she understood that something extraordinary had just happened. She slightly bowed her head toward the water, a gesture that seemed to be respect for the grumpy neighbor who had protected her treasure. The two of them stood together under the evening light, a beautiful image of maternal love and survival. For Keto, the lesson today was greater than any hunting skill he would learn later. He understood that the savannah was not just about predators and prey, not just about hatred and blood. Sometimes, between the most distant species, there still exists an invisible bond. Salvation does not always come from one's own kind. It can come from a sudden stranger who unintentionally becomes the sturdiest shield. Before following his mother away from the riverbank to return to the pride, Keto turned back to look at the red dirt wall and the green river stretch one last time. He would never forget the feeling of trembling under Mkua's shadow or the humiliating flight of the hyena. The savannah would still be harsh, and dangers would return, but Keto now carried within him a new faith. The faith that even in the darkest moments, nature always has its own ways to protect life. Under the brilliant sunset, the 2 figures, one large and one small, faded behind the green grass ridges. The story of the little lion and the hot-tempered hippo would soon be blown away by the savannah wind, but it had managed to leave a beautiful resonance. That kindness sometimes hides under rough skin and grunts, and this life is always precious because of the most unexpected connections. The midday heat at the buffer zone between the great forest and the savannah did not just burn. It carried the searing weight of destiny. The deep blue sky was stained by thick black plumes of smoke from a distant forest fire, turning the air into a suffocating mixture of ash and heat rising from the earth. Amidst that harsh landscape, Asha appeared like a golden phantom, lonely and exhausted. Asha was no longer a proud hunter of the Black Claw pride. Her amber eyes, once sharp, were now veiled by a mist of grief. A cruel plague had taken her newborn cubs, leaving a vast void in the heart of the lioness that even bloody hunts could not fill. She had left her pride, wandering aimlessly as if to escape the call of her own kind. At a parched clearing, Asha stopped. The scent of death lingered in the wind, but another strange sound caught her attention. A tiny, trembling whimper. Before her lay the body of a mother gorilla who had collapsed from exhaustion and smoke. Clinging to that scorched black fur was Coco, a tiny creature with round, dark eyes looking at her in terror. In that moment, the killer instinct of an apex predator suddenly fell silent. Instead, a surge of maternal instinct rose up, powerful and irrational. Asha stepped closer, not to prey, but to lean down and use her rough tongue to gently lick a smear of blood on the forehead of Coco. A wordless promise was made under the burning sun. You shall not die alone. The brief peace between Asha and Coco was ripped apart by a heavy pressure rushing in from behind. In the natural world, the scent of blood and weakness is always a magnet for predators. From the dry thorn bushes, the black claw pride began to emerge. Leading them was Keto, a male lion with a pitch-black mane and scarred face, evidence of hundreds of bloody battles to maintain his throne. Keto stopped, his fiery eyes scanning the body of the mother gorilla before settling on Coco. To him, this was not a life deserving of sympathy, but a gift from the savannah, an easy lunch under the blistering sun. Following Keto were other lionesses of the pride, including sisters who once shared the best kills with Asha. They looked at Asha with scrutiny, waiting for her to step back to make way for their king. Move aside, Asha, the low growl in the throat of Keto, vibrated through the hot air. He took a step forward, sharp claws slightly peeking out from his paw pads. But Asha did not retreat. Instead, she lowered her center of gravity, shielding Coco beneath her chest. A defiant roar answered back. Not a roar of submission, but the cry of a mother protecting a child. This act was a shock to the entire pride. In the law of lions, betraying the command of the alpha male meant death or permanent exile. It is not prey, the eyes of Asha seemed to say. The other lionesses began to stir. They saw the madness in the eyes of Asha, but they also saw something else. The despair of a mother who just lost her young. A hesitation hung over the lionesses. They feared the authority of Keto, yet they could not bear to attack their most loyal sister over a small gorilla. Keto lost patience. To him, the defiance of Asha was a stain on his absolute power. He let out a roar that shook the buffer zone, preparing for a fatal pounce. Just then, a sudden strong wind blew through, carrying dust from the forest fire to create a blurry veil. Asha knew this was her only chance. She could not win against the whole pride in a direct fight. In the moment of chaos as the dust obscured the vision of Keto, Asha quickly grabbed the scruff of Coco, gently but firmly, and bolted like an arrow toward the distant rainforest. The chase began immediately under the fire-like sun of noon. The thundering footsteps of Keto and the two fastest lionesses followed closely. Coco clung to the back of Asha, small hands digging deep into her golden fur. Every stride of Asha was a gamble with death. She jumped over sharp thorn bushes and crossed jagged rocks, her lungs ready to burst from the heat and exhaustion. Ahead was the thick forest, the only hope, but behind were the reapers closing the gap. The heavy panting of Asha echoed alongside the rhythmic thumping of the pursuers right behind. Before her, a dry creek bed appeared like a line of fate. This was the zone of isolation, where the golden grasses of the savannah ended and gave way to the dark, humid canopy of the jungle. But the creek had no water to protect them. It was only a basin of white pebbles, glowing hot under the high sun. As Asha set foot in the creek bed, Keto caught up. With a spectacular leap, the massive male lion blocked her path. Two other lionesses quickly moved to seal the remaining exits. Asha was surrounded in the dry creek with no way out. On her back, Coco trembled so hard that Asha could feel the racing heartbeat through her own skin. Keto had no more patience. He swung a thunderous blow. Asha dodged in time, but the claws of Keto still grazed her shoulder, leaving 3 deep red furrows as blood began to soak her golden coat. The pain made Asha shiver, But instead of running, she crouched even lower, forming a shelter of flesh and bone to encase Coco under her belly. She roared, a cry of resentment and resilience, ready to trade her life to keep this tiny soul. The battle was uneven. Asha had to fend off direct lunges from Keto while watching for strikes from the two lionesses circling her. Each time Keto charged, Asha used all her remaining strength to push him back, despite the new wounds on her body. Her tenacity began to amaze Keto. He did not understand why a lioness would fight so fiercely for a creature not of her kind. Just as Keto prepared to deliver a finishing strike to the throat of Asha, a strange sound erupted from the forest. It was not the roar of a big cat, but a series of short, broken huffs of immense power. Coco, in the moment near death, used all his strength to let out a characteristic call of his species, a plea for help that echoed through the great forest. The ground beneath the creek began to vibrate slightly. From the shadows of the ancient trees, a massive dark silhouette emerged. It was a silverback gorilla, with a chest as wide as a platform and arms rippling with muscle. He stood upright on two legs, using steel-like fists to beat his chest repeatedly, creating sounds like the war drums of the jungle. The appearance of the king of the forest made the lion pride freeze. Keto roared to show his dominance, but the gorilla did not back down. The noon sun shone on his silver back, reflecting pure muscular power and unshakable rage. In the dry creek, a breathless three-way standoff. The hungry lions, the furious giant gorilla, and in the middle, Asha, the exhausted mother covered in wounds, yet refusing to abandon her duty. The space suddenly went silent, leaving only the sound of wind whistling through the rocks, signaling a shift in the situation that no one could have predicted. In the sun-baked creek bed, a terrifying silence fell. Keto stared at the silverback gorilla. He knew his own strength, but he also knew that facing a raging giant in this cramped space was an unnecessary risk. More importantly, Keto looked into the eyes of Asha. In her gaze, there was no longer the fear of an outcast, but a suicidal determination. She would fight until her last breath, and if he stepped forward, he would pay with severe injuries before touching the prey. Keto gave one final roar, a cry of pride, but also an indication of retreat to save face as a king. He turned, signaling the two lionesses to leave. The Black Claw pride moved somberly back toward the golden plains, their shadows fading in the intense sun. Asha watched until they were only tiny dots. At that point, the last of her strength vanished. She collapsed onto the hot rocks, her breath shallow, blood still flowing from her left shoulder. The silverback gorilla slowly lowered his stance, moving on four limbs as he approached. The previous aggression was gone, replaced by a respectful caution. He saw Asha, he saw the deep wounds on her body, and he saw Coco, the child of his tribe, trembling as the infant crawled out from under the belly of the enemy. Coco did not run away immediately. The young gorilla looked at Asha, the one who used her body as a shield against the claws of death. In a miraculous moment, transcending the boundaries of animals, Coco moved toward the head of Asha. He used his small, dark hand to gently touch the wound on her shoulder, a gesture seemingly intended to soothe the pain. Their eyes met. One side representing innocence newly escaped from death, the other representing the grace of a mother who had fulfilled her vow. Asha groaned softly, using her wet nose to gently nudge Coco toward the silverback. It was a farewell. She knew she belonged to the vast savanna, while Coco belonged to those green leaves. The giant gorilla reached out his powerful arm, lifting Coco into his embrace. He looked at Asha one last time, a slight nod of acknowledgement. She was not just a lion, she was a mother. Two worlds, which usually met only in slaughter, were now connected by a silent thread of gratitude. The gorilla turned, carrying Coco away until they vanished into the green veil of the jungle. Asha lay there alone in the dry creek as the midday sun began to soften. She was lonely, in pain, and without a pride. But for the first time since her own cubs died, her heart felt light. The void in her soul was filled by the warmth of a life she chose to protect. She had lost everything, but found herself at the edge of life and death. As the harsh midday rays slowly turned into the honey-colored light of late afternoon, Asha painfully stood up. Every movement now carried the sting of open wounds, but her steps were no longer heavy with the burden of the past. She walked along the dry creek, leaving behind the border of the forest where Coco had returned to his kind. Asha returned to the savannah, but she was not the lioness of yesterday. She was a lone traveler, a rebel in the eyes of the pride, but a hero in the epic of life. Her sacrifice did not just save a small gorilla. It saved her own soul from the darkness of despair. In the moment of facing death to protect Coco, Asha found a truth higher than the instinct of survival, the power of connection. The story of Asha and Coco is a powerful testament that compassion has no boundaries, no language, and is not bound by species. In a natural world often considered cruel and cold, there still exist gaps of kindness where a predator can become a protector and a prey can become a source of hope. It reminds us that deep within every living being, there's an invisible bond, a basic instinct for love and empathy. We often view the world through the lens of difference, barriers, and prejudice. But if a lioness can overcome the separation of species to protect a child not of her own blood, then what reason do we, humans, have to not understand and tolerate one another? Kindness is not weakness. It is the greatest courage to stand firm in a changing world. Asha vanished into the horizon, her silhouette blending into the golden hue of the dry grass. She might face a lonely life ahead, but she carries with her a beautiful secret of the wilderness, that maternal love can sprout even on the most barren soil of pain. Thank you for joining us on this emotional journey of Asha and Coco. If this story touched your heart, do not hesitate to press the like button and share to spread the message of kindness to more people. What do you think about the choice made by Asha? Can compassion change the laws of nature? Please leave your thoughts in the comments below. Do not forget to subscribe to the channel so you do not miss the next inspiring stories about the wild world. See you in the next video. Dawn at Virunga National Park does not begin with light, but with sounds. It is a symphony of thousands of tropical birds, the rustling of giant leaves, and the heavy scent of damp earth after a forest rain. Mark, a veteran photographer with eyes marked by the traces of time, was quietly packing his tent. He had been here for a week, searching for a masterpiece, a photo that could capture the soul of the Congo jungle. But the forest remained silent. Just as he intended to leave, a sound tore through the peaceful atmosphere. It was not the majestic roar of an alpha beast, but a series of broken gasps, carrying extreme pain and despair. The instinct of a photo hunter surfaced. Mark did not think much. He grabbed his camera and rushed toward the thicket. Weaving through ancient tree roots covering green moss, Mark suddenly froze. His heart tightened. In a small clearing where daylight shone down like a stage light, a horrific scene appeared. The mother gorilla, a symbol of protection, now lay motionless on a carpet of dry leaves. Surrounding her were two leopards growling, their deathly eyes glowing in the shade. And then, Mark saw it. A trembling baby gorilla, its large amber eyes full of fear looking directly at him. The little ape did not run away. It approached the base of the tree where Mark was hiding, its small hands clutching the wood, emitting weak cries for help. In this moment, Mark realized that this was no longer a photo hunt. This was the thin line between life and death, and he was the sole witness. Mark stood frozen behind the ancient tree, his breath so heavy that he feared the leopards would hear the heart beating wildly in his chest. A cold chill ran down his spine, even though the sun was high in the jungle now. The two leopards were in no hurry. They knew the large prey had fallen, and the little ape was just a dessert that could not escape their reach. One of the leopards began to approach, its steps terrifyingly smooth on the carpet of leaf mulch, its golden eyes fixed on the tiny, trembling being. In the mind of Mark at this time was a mess of the most primitive survival instincts. He knew the rules of the jungle well. Never interfere in the cycle of nature. He also knew his position well. A solitary human, without weapons, without the ability to defend himself against the most skilled predators in the world. I am a photographer, not a hero, Mark told himself, his palms sweaty, making the camera slippery. If I step out there, I will be the next name left under this forest canopy. He began to retreat, step by step, very slowly so as not to make a sound. Mark turned his back, trying to push the heart-wrenching cries of the little ape out of his mind. He justified his cowardice by saying that this was the harsh law of the food chain, that the sacrifice of the mother was inevitable. But when his feet had just moved 10 meters, Mark accidentally looked down at the digital screen of the camera hanging in front of his chest. It was the photo he had just captured in the moment of fate. The baby ape clutching the tree trunk. Its gaze was not just fear, but an absolute trust in something larger that it had just seen him. That look was like an arrow piercing through the callous shell of a man who had spent half his life observing the world through a lens. Mark stopped. He realized that if he walked away now, he would have a prize-winning photo, but he would lose his own soul. He could not go home, look in the mirror, and know that he had left his soul crying for help while he had the chance to change it. Fear remained, but compassion began to take over. Mark took a deep breath, the jungle air filling his lungs as if giving him a crazy strength. He could not fight the leopards with muscle power, but he had his intellect and his tools. He remembered the high-power flash and the ultrasonic rescue whistle in his gear bag, items intended for when he got lost. Mark tightened the camera strap, his face transforming from horror to a cold determination. He did not turn to run away anymore. He turned back, walking toward death to find life. Mark had no time to create a detailed plan. The larger leopard had approached the tree base, less than 2 meters from the little ape. It lowered its center of gravity, muscular shoulders rising high in preparation for the fatal pounce. Mark knew that if he hesitated for one more second, those amber eyes would close forever. He reached into his jacket pocket, gripped the metal rescue whistle, and switched on the external flash unit in his other hand. "Hey, big cats, look over here," Mark bellowed, a shout not meant to threaten, but to distract. Just as the 2 leopards startled and turned their heads, Mark blew a long and piercing whistle. The ultrasonic sound of the rescue whistle echoed in the quiet space of the jungle, like a drill stabbing into the eardrums. The leopards froze, their ears flattening in discomfort at the strange sound they had never heard in their lives. But that was only the beginning. Mark raised the high-power flash, the type specialized for photography in dark caves, and pressed the button to activate the continuous strobe mode. Flash, flash, flash. Bursts of blinding white light, stronger than the sun, exploded repeatedly in the shade of the dense leaves. For leopards with eyes extremely sensitive to light for hunting in the dark, these flashes were no different from light bombs, paralyzing their optic nerves. They roared, not a hunting roar, but a roar of confusion, beginning to retreat, their legs stepping clumsily due to temporary blindness. In that very moment of chaos, Mark rushed out from his hiding place. He ran like he had never run before, across the carpet of mulch and slippery roots. The little ape, seemingly understanding that this was the last chance, let go of the tree and reached its small arms toward him. Mark leaned down, his strong arms wrapping around the warm and trembling body of the tiny creature. The weight of the baby gorilla, about 10 kilograms, made him stumble slightly, but adrenaline flowing in his blood made him feel stronger than ever. He did not turn his back. While carrying the baby ape, Mark continued to press the flash button toward the rear to prevent the leopards from chasing. The little ape clung tightly to the neck of Mark, burying its head in his chest, its rapid breath soaking through the thin fabric. Mark felt its heart beating wildly like a small drum. He ran frantically toward his camp, where small barbed wire fences and the sound of the generator could help him hold out. After a few seconds of disorientation, the leopards began to roar and pursue, but the hesitation before the strange lights had given Mark a precious distance. He lunged into the tent area, pulled down the screen, and collapsed on the dirt floor, his two lungs about to burst from lack of oxygen. But his arms never loosened from the tiny being he had just snatched from the hands of death. In the narrow space of the canvas tent, the heavy breathing of Mark mingled with the faint whimpering of the little gorilla. The daylight still filtered through the fabric, creating a warm yellow color, completely opposite to the deadly darkness that both had just escaped. After making sure that the leopards had given up before the strange noises from the generator and the wire fence, Mark gently placed the little ape down on a soft wool blanket. Now, he had the chance to closely observe his unexpected companion. The baby ape was smaller than he imagined, its black fur matted with mud and the dried blood of its mother. Mark reached for the first aid kit, gently using cotton soaked in warm water to wipe away the dirt on the tiny face. Initially, the baby ape shrank back, its large eyes full of suspicion. But when it felt the gentleness in every movement of Mark, it gradually relaxed. It extended a tiny, wrinkled finger to touch the large hand of Mark, as if trying to confirm whether this strange creature was friend or foe. Mark opened a can of fruit and broke off small pieces of wild banana he had picked this morning. He pushed the plate gently toward the little ape. Hunger and exhaustion after the escape made the baby ape no longer hesitate. It picked up the banana pieces with trembling hands and ate heartily. Seeing that scene, Mark felt an indescribable surge of emotion in his chest. He named it Mosi, which in the local language means the first child. Mosi was not just an animal he had saved. It was now a part of his responsibility, a reminder of why he chose the path of becoming a nature photographer. To protect, not just to observe. The afternoon slowly passed, the sun beginning to fade on the peaks of the Virunga volcanoes. Mosi, after being fed, began to feel sleepy. It crawled close to Mark, naturally as it once did with its mother, then curled up next to his leg. Mark froze, the warmth from that small body spreading through the khaki trousers, warming even the darkest corners of his soul. He set aside the camera, the object he used to consider the most important thing in his life. At this moment, he realized that no photo, no matter how brilliant, could compare to the feeling of a life trusting in him. In the silence of the jungle, Mark began to flip through the notes about the guerrilla troops in this area. He knew he could not keep Mosi for long. He did not have the expertise to raise a mature gorilla, and more importantly, Mosi belonged to the Green Forest. He needed to find it a new family, a place where it could learn to become a true king of the jungle. Through long-range binoculars, Mark observed the forest patches to the east, where a troop of silverback gorillas famous for being gentle frequently visited. He gently stroked the head of Mosi, silently promising that he would help it find the way home, even though the path ahead was still full of lurking dangers. The pale yellow light of the late afternoon dyed the volcanic cliffs red as Mark began the most important journey of his life. He carried Mosi in front of his chest in a homemade cloth bag, feeling the warmth and the gentle heartbeat of the little ape who had fallen asleep. According to observations from the long-range lens, Mark knew that the gorilla troop of the alpha silverback, named Kabaka, was stopping to rest in the eastern forest patch, where there were lush bamboo thickets. This was a troop famous for tolerance, where they had accepted orphaned gorillas before. When only about 200 meters from the location, Mark stopped. He was not allowed to get too close to avoid scaring the troop or being seen as an invader. He gently placed Mosi down on a soft grass carpet, right next to the trail that the gorilla troop would surely pass to reach their night shelter. Mosi looked around in confusion. It tugged at the hem of the shirt of Mark, its amber eyes showing clear panic. Mark knelt down, looked deep into its eyes, and whispered, "Go, Mosi. This is where you belong. You will be as strong as your mother." Mark retreated, hiding behind a dense bush, and waited. 10 minutes passed like a century. Then, heavy thumping sounds echoed, branches snapping. A large female gorilla stepped out from the thicket. It stopped when it saw the tiny creature alone in the path. Mosi let out a weak cry. The female stopped, its eyes observing Mosi with a mixture of curiosity and compassion. Following, it was Kabaka, the majestic Alpha with a silver back coat shimmering under the afternoon sun. Kabaka approached, sniffing the scent of Mosi. Mark held his breath, his hand gripping the camera, but not daring to press the shutter for fear that the noise would ruin this moment. After a moment of consideration, the female gorilla stepped forward. It opened its long, hairy arms and gently picked Mosi up. Mosi was initially a bit shy, but the instinct of the species told it that this was a fellow kind, a family. It buried its head in the thick fur of that female. The troop continued to move, disappearing behind the dense leaves, carrying Mosi back to their green cathedral. Mark stood silent for a long time in the jungle, feeling an emptiness mixed with bursting happiness. He lifted the camera, looking back at the photos he had taken. He realized he had the masterpiece he had been searching for. Not a scene of tragic death, but the small back of Mosi nestled in the arms of a new family. Mark smiled, a peaceful smile that he had lost for a long time. Returning to the tent, Mark began to write the final journal entries for this trip. He was no longer the callous man who only hunted soulless frames. Virunga had taught him that sometimes the most valuable thing about a photo does not lie in what appears on the paper, but in what it has saved in reality. He packed his things, his soul filled with a new faith. He would tell the story of Mosi to the whole world, so they would know that amid the cruelty of nature, love and courage still always sprout like the resilient moss on the rocks of the old forest. Night fell over the Atlantic Ocean, not with peace, but with a symphony of death. Amidst waves as high as collapsing buildings, a battered, unmarked cargo ship struggled against a Force 8 storm. The sound of screeching steel under the pressure of wind and water was haunting, but the most terrifying noise came from deep within the dark hold. A resounding roar, full of rage and fear. Keto, a male lion possessing the majestic beauty of the savannah, was imprisoned inside a cold steel container. He was not a passenger. He was a legal cargo on the way to a wealthy man with a taste for the exotic. As the ship tilted heavily to one side, due to water flooding the hull, chaos engulfed the smugglers. In their panic, they fled, abandoning the precious cargo amidst the violent waters. A powerful collision between containers broke the lock on the door of Keto. The moment the ship began to be swallowed by the ocean, the instinct for survival rose stronger than ever. Keto lunged out of the iron cage, diving straight into the pitch-black, freezing water. Behind him, the final lights of the ship vanished, leaving the lion alone in a world of nothing but sea salt and vast darkness. The king of the forest was now just a small living being, struggling to keep his breath from being submerged by the waves. When the first weak rays of dawn pierced through the thick fog, the ocean had regained its deceptive stillness. The storm had passed, leaving the sea's surface as flat as a mirror, but full of lethality. In that immense space, Keto was still struggling. Over an hour had passed since the ship sank, and every moment for this lion was a torture of the flesh. Lions are powerful animals, but they were not created by nature to be swimmers in the middle of the ocean. The eyes of Keto were now bloodshot due to salt water irritation, and his breath was ragged and heavy. The majestic mane, once a symbol of power, was now soaked and heavy like a lead sheet, pulling his body down to the depths. The cold from the current began to soak deep into his bones, paralyzing the muscles that were only used to the scorching sun of the savannah. Each time Keto tried to paddle to keep his head above the waves, he felt his strength draining away. His world at this moment was only an endless deep blue, with no sign of land, no sound of birds, only the sound of a heart beating rapidly in a chest tightening from exhaustion. The instinct of a ruler did not allow him to give up, but the logic of nature was whispering that death was only a matter of time. Precisely in that moment of near surrender, a bright red speck appeared on the horizon. It was Buoy 42, a maritime marker standing tall, like a tiny lighthouse in the middle of the sea. To a human, it was just a rusty piece of metal to mark a shipping lane. But to Keto, it was the only land left on Earth. Keto used all his remaining strength, pushing legs that were cramped from the cold to swim toward that glowing red object. The moment the front paw of Keto touched the hard metal shell of the buoy was an image both painful and sacred. Sharp claws, normally used to hunt antelope, now frantically scratched at the rusty iron covered in barnacles and green moss to find a grip. The sound of metal screeching under the claws of the beast created a chilling noise. He tried to pull himself up, slipped, then pulled again. Finally, Keto managed to crawl onto the narrow platform of the buoy. The lion lay flat, his body shaking uncontrollably with shivers. He clung tightly to the steel pole, his claws still digging deep into the buoy shell as if fearing that this tiny island would also vanish. Keto raised his head, looking toward the infinite horizon and letting out a weak roar. That roar no longer held the pride of a top predator, but was a lonely cry of sorrow, a plea for help sent into the sea breeze. He sat there, an overthrown king, clinging to a block of iron in the middle of the ocean, waiting for a miracle that he did not even know existed. The patrol ship Sea Guard 01 cut through the waves on a mission to assess damage after the fierce storm. On the command bridge, the rescue soldiers were well used to searching for debris, life buoys, or drifting victims. However, when a young officer held his binoculars toward buoy 42, he suddenly froze as if turned to stone.
Key commander, sir, over there.
There's a strange object on the maritime buoy, he stammered. When the camera lens zoomed in on the central screen, the entire cockpit fell into a breathtaking silence. A lion, a full-grown male lion, was holding on in the middle of the vast ocean. The initial disbelief was quickly replaced by urgency. However, approaching this target was a challenge without precedent in rescue history. Large swells, the aftermath of the storm, were still surging dangerously, causing the red buoy to bob violently. As Sea Guard 01 drew near, Keto did not see the rescuers as saviors. In a mind full of trauma, that giant iron ship was the monster that had imprisoned him in darkness and pushed him into the sea. Keto bared his teeth and growled, amber eyes streaked with blood staring at the rescue team with extreme hostility. He bristled his mane, trying to stand firm on the narrow buoy platform, ready to attack anyone who dared to enter his final boundary. Time pressure weighed on the shoulders of the patrol team as the radar announced a whirlpool moving closer. The buoy 42 showed signs of a loose anchor, starting to drift freely. "We cannot use tranquilizers," the captain ordered. This was a difficult decision. If tranquilized, Keto would fall unconscious in a few minutes. But when his muscles relaxed, he would slide off the buoy and sink to the bottom of the sea before the rescue team could reach him. They had to save him while he was still conscious or never.
Confirmed.
The rescue team began to implement a
rotation.
bold plan. They used the crane of the ship to lower a specialized iron cage filled with protective netting down near the water surface. A piece of fresh meat was strategically placed inside the cage as an invitation, and also to distract the attention of the beast. The wind began to blow harder. The cage hanging on the cable swayed with the rhythm of the waves, creating a dramatic scene. Each time the cage collided with the buoy, creating a clanging metal sound, Keto stepped back, his claws tearing the red paint, his roar echoing across the sea area, expressing the conflict between the instinct to protect territory and his stomach growling from hunger and thirst. The rescue now became a battle of wits. The patrol ship had to keep enough distance to not flip the buoy, but also be close enough to control the crane precisely to every centimeter. The rescue workers held their breath, sweat pouring down their faces despite the cold of the sea. They were not only facing a wild beast, but were also racing against death as the buoy began to spin with the whirlpool. All hope was now concentrated on a fragile moment of connection between man and beast. In the extreme tension of the rescue, when mechanical methods seemed only to aggravate the fear of Keto, a quiet change took place. Mark, a seasoned member of the patrol team who had spent many years volunteering at wildlife conservation centers, realized that they could not subdue Keto with steel or coercion. He signaled the team to lower the crane and asked the captain to reduce the engine noise to a minimum. The space between the ocean suddenly became unusually quiet, leaving only the sound of waves lapping against the side of the ship and the heavy, gasping breath of the lion. Mark stepped to the edge of the ship, carrying no weapons or sticks. He knelt down to reduce the threat of height and looked directly into the amber eyes of Keto, which were glowing with alertness. Between the human and the beast at this moment was only a few meters of cold seawater. Mark began to speak, his voice low, steady, and gentle like a lullaby. He did not give orders, he was just talking. He told Keto about the distant savannah, about the warmth of Mother Earth, and about a promise that the torment had ended. Lions are animals with high intuition. In that moment, Keto suddenly stopped growling. His ears, which had been pinned back, began to move, turning toward the peaceful sound from the stranger. The fierce gaze, containing the trauma of days imprisoned on the smuggler's ship, began to soften. He saw in the eyes of Mark not the greed of poachers, nor the threat of another predator, but a deep empathy. An invisible but strong bond was established between two species that had never belonged together. Keto looked down at the whirlpool lurking beneath the buoy, then looked back at the open rescue cage. He seemed to understand that this was his only chance to survive, to be able to set foot on dry grass once again. In an act that made all members on Sea Guard 01 hold their breath, Keto slowly loosened his claws from the steel pole of the buoy. He no longer tried to cling to that rusty iron block. The lion moved toward the edge of the buoy, gave a small shiver, and then placed one front paw on the floor of the rescue cage. When the entire massive body of Keto was settled in the cage, he did not struggle or try to attack. He huddled up, resting his head on his two front paws, tired eyes half closed, as if he had finally found a safe shelter after so many storms. Mark continued to whisper words of comfort as the crane slowly lifted the cage into the air. The moment the cage touched the steady deck of the ship, a collective sigh of relief echoed from the rescue team. There were no victory cheers, only tearful eyes looking at the exhausted king. Keto had chosen to trust humans once more, and that was the greatest victory of this rescue. After many weeks of special care at a coastal rehabilitation station to treat wounds from sea salt and pneumonia, Keto was finally healthy enough to undertake the most important journey of his life. A military transport plane carried the lion across thousands of miles of airspace, away from the haunting ocean to return to the intense sun and the rich scent of the African soil. The destination was a vast national nature reserve, where golden grasslands stretched to the horizon. The day of the release of Keto was a brilliant afternoon, when the sunlight dyed the entire space red, creating a glorious scene as if to welcome a king returning from death. The truck carrying the iron cage stopped in the middle of a peaceful valley. Mark, the rescue soldier who had created that fateful bond, was also present. He stood at a distance, quietly observing his special friend. As the cage door slowly slid open, a silence covered all those witnessing. Keto did not rush out immediately. He cautiously stepped 1 foot out of the cage, feeling the first contact between the sole of his foot and the warm, dry ground. It was not cold metal, nor was it the precarious water surface, but the stability of the old continent. He took a very deep breath, filling his chest with the smell of dry grass, of dust, and the heat of the savannah, sense that at one point he thought he would never see again. Keto stepped out completely, his majestic figure silhouetted against the sunset sky. He took a few steps, feeling again the strength in every muscle fiber that had been recovered. Then a miraculous thing happened. Keto stopped. He did not run away immediately, but slowly turned his head to look back at Mark and the rescue team. In that brief moment, the amber eyes no longer had fear, no longer had hatred, but only a strange serenity. It was a look of gratitude, a wordless farewell for the humans who did not abandon him in the deep blue of the ocean. Keto let out a resounding roar, shaking the entire space. This roar was completely different from the weak cry for help on Buoy 42 or the angry sound on the patrol ship. This was the roar of power, of freedom, announcing to the whole world that the king had returned to his kingdom. After that roar, Kido turned his back, taking powerful strides into the bushes and disappearing into the golden silk of the dry grass. When the figure of Kido completely merged into nature, a small but heavy line of text appeared on the screen. The ocean is not the home of the king of the forest. Please return wildlife to where they belong. The story of Kido is not just a miracle of survival, but also a testament to the power of empathy. Amidst the dark sides of human greed, there are always hearts ready to face danger to correct mistakes, to keep this world still, having majestic roars in the jungle instead of the deadly silence in the middle of the sea.